At 2:13 in the morning, 19 Harley-Davidsons rolled through the frozen streets of a city that had already given up on a 12-year-old boy. Their engines didn't roar, they screamed. And behind a cracked apartment window on the third floor, a man who had broken a woman's ribs twice in 6 months heard that scream and understood something no court order had ever taught him. There are things in this world more dangerous than violence. But this story doesn't begin with thunder. It begins with silence. The kind that hides behind thin walls, beneath bruises covered by long sleeves, inside a boy's chest where a scream has been trapped for 3 years. Before the highway saints became protectors, they were ghosts. Before Theo Mercer found his voice, he was disappearing. And before anyone in Black Hollow decided to care, the system had already looked this boy in the eye and walked away. If you think you know where this story is going, you don't. Stay until the end. Hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. Because this one is going to stay with you long after it's over. This is The Sound of Thunder. Part 1. The boy learned to count the seconds between impact and silence. 3 seconds meant his mother had absorbed the blow without falling. 5 seconds meant she'd hit the floor and was trying to stand. Anything longer than 7 meant Theo Mercer needed to leave his bedroom, cross the narrow hallway of their third-floor apartment, and stand in the kitchen doorway like a ghost that refused to stop haunting the living. He was 12. Skinny arms, knees that knocked together when the temperature dropped below 40, a jaw too sharp for his age, as if hunger had carved his face into something premature and angular. He wore the same gray hoodie to school 4 days a week because it was the only one without bloodstains on the cuffs. Not his blood, never his, but close enough to taste. Tonight was a 5-second night. He heard the sound from his bedroom, a dull, wet thud that shook the wall behind his headboard, followed by a gasp that didn't belong to any human being who still believed help was coming. Then silence. Then the slow, dragging sound of his mother pulling herself up using the kitchen counter, her fingernails scraping cheap laminate. Theo pressed his palms flat against the wall and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She was standing. He exhaled, but the air that left his lungs was not relief. It was something colder, the kind of breath a person takes when they've already accepted that tonight is not the worst night, which means the worst night is still coming. In the next room, the man, Dale Whitford, 6'1", 220 pounds of frayed nerve endings and cheap whiskey, sat back down at the kitchen table as though nothing had happened. He cracked open another can. The aluminum tab made a sound like a small bone breaking. Theo knew that sound too. He had memorized every sound in this apartment the way other boys memorized batting averages or video game combos. The creak of the third floorboard meant Dale was walking toward the bedroom. The click of the front door lock meant Dale was leaving for a bar, and they had maybe 4 hours of peace. The low murmur of the television at 1 a.m. meant Dale was still awake and still drinking, which meant the next sound could be anything. Theo's mother, Lena Mercer, had not always been this quiet. There were photographs buried in a shoebox beneath Theo's bed. Polaroids from before Dale, before the apartment, before the slow erosion of a woman who once laughed so loud the neighbors complained. In those photos, Lena had freckles scattered across her nose and a gap between her front teeth that made her smile look reckless. She was 23 in most of them, holding a baby. Theo, wrapped in a yellow blanket, and looking directly at the camera with the kind of defiance that young mothers carry when they're too stubborn to be afraid. She was 31 now. The freckles had faded. The gap was still there, but she never showed it anymore because smiling required a kind of energy that Dale had systematically drained from her body over 3 years of closed-fist lessons about who owned the silence in this home. Theo didn't hate Dale. That was the part nobody would understand later. Hatred required a surplus of feeling, and Theo had been running on empty since he was 9. What he felt instead was a cold, mechanical awareness, the way a trapped animal watches the hand that feeds it and the hand that strikes it and understands that both hands belong to the same creature. But something had shifted 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday. Theo remembered because Tuesdays were trash nights, and Dale always made Lena take the bags down 3 flights of stairs, even when her wrist was swollen. Theo had followed her down to help, and in the stairwell between the second and first floors, Beneath a buzzing fluorescent light that turned everything the color of old teeth, Lena had stopped walking. She didn't say anything. She just stopped. And Theo watched his mother stand completely still in that stairwell, holding two garbage bags, staring at the concrete wall with an expression he had never seen on her face before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't exhaustion. It was calculation. The quiet arithmetic of a person measuring the distance between survival and surrender and realizing the gap had become almost invisible. Theo took the garbage bags from her hands. He didn't speak. They walked downstairs, threw the bags into the dumpster, and climbed back up in silence. But that night, lying in his bed, listening to Dale's television murmur through the wall, Theo made a decision that would eventually bring 19 motorcycles to his street and tear a hole in the silence wide enough for an entire neighborhood to crawl through. He decided to find something louder than fear. The first person Theo asked for help was his school counselor. Mrs. Devlin was a short woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a desktop calendar covered in motivational stickers. She had a master's degree in social work and a filing cabinet full of incident reports that she submitted quarterly to a system designed to process paper, not pain. Theo sat across from her on a Wednesday morning, his backpack on his lap like a shield, and told her that a man was hurting his mother. He said it simply. No tears, no dramatic pauses. He had rehearsed the sentence 14 times in the bathroom mirror and stripped it down to its cleanest, most undeniable form. A man is hurting my mom. Mrs. Devlin removed her glasses. She asked follow-up questions. How long has this been happening? Does the man live with you? Has anyone else witnessed the behavior? Does your mother know you're here? Theo answered everything. Mrs. Devlin wrote careful notes on a yellow legal pad, nodded slowly, and told Theo she would flag the situation with the appropriate authorities. She used that exact phrase, flag the situation, as though his mother's broken body were a document that needed routing. 4 days later, a social worker visited the apartment. Dale answered the door in a clean shirt, sober, smiling. Lena stood behind him with concealer on her jaw and a rehearsed calm in her voice that she'd learned the way prisoners learn to flatten their faces during inspections. Everything's fine, Lena said. The social worker noted that the apartment was clean, that there was food in the refrigerator, that the child appeared physically healthy. She checked 3 boxes on a form, thanked them for their time, and left. That evening, Dale hit Lena for the first time with the door closed and the lights off, so the bruises would land where fabric covered them. Theo heard it. 7 seconds of silence this time. He did not go back to Mrs. Devlin. Instead, he tried the police. Not by calling 911, he was 12, not naive, and he understood that a 911 call from a child about a domestic situation would result in officers arriving, asking questions, receiving polished answers, and leaving. He had watched it happen before, twice. Both times, the officers had spoken to Dale in the hallway with a tone of professional detachment that suggested they had already decided nothing here warranted paperwork. So Theo walked to the precinct. It was a Thursday after school. He walked 11 blocks in the November cold, his gray hoodie pulled tight around his ears, his breath making small clouds that vanished before they reached the height of his forehead. The precinct was a brown brick building with bulletproof glass at the front desk and a waiting area that smelled like floor cleaner and burned coffee. Theo told the desk sergeant he needed to report ongoing domestic violence at his home address. The sergeant, a heavy man with a shaved head and bifocals, looked at Theo the way adults look at children who use words too large for their bodies. He asked Theo to sit down. He made a phone call. 20 minutes later, a female officer in plain clothes came out, introduced herself as Detective something Theo immediately forgot, and walked him to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. She was kind. She took notes. She told Theo he was brave for coming in, which made him feel less brave because he understood that adults only use that word when they were about to explain why they couldn't do what you needed them to do. The detective explained that without corroborating evidence, without his mother's cooperation, without physical documentation obtained through proper channels, the department's ability to intervene was limited. She used the word limited the way a doctor uses the word complicated, as a professional curtain drawn over a simple truth. They couldn't help him, or wouldn't. Theo had stopped trying to distinguish between the two. He walked home in the dark. 11 blocks. The streetlights in his neighborhood were broken in alternating patterns. Two working, one dead, two working, one dead. So the sidewalk strobed between amber and black as he moved. He counted his steps the way he counted seconds after impact, mechanically, without hope, because the alternative to counting was thinking, and thinking led to the kind of places where 12-year-old boys start making permanent decisions. He didn't go home. Not right away. He walked past his building, past the bodega on the corner where the owner played Dominican radio all night, past the laundromat that never fully closed, and kept walking until the residential blocks gave way to the commercial strip where mechanics' shops and tire yards crouched behind chain-link fences. And that was when he saw the garage. Black Hollow Garage sat at the dead end of Morrow Street like a church for machines that had been excommunicated from polite society. The building was old brick, blackened by decades of exhaust and neglect, with a corrugated steel roof that amplified rain into a sound like continuous applause. Two floodlights mounted above the main bay door threw cones of pale light onto the cracked asphalt lot where motorcycles gleamed in ordered rows, chrome and black paint catching the rain like polished weapons laid out for inspection. 19 Harleys. Theo counted them the way he counted everything. He had heard about the highway saints the way every kid in this part of the city heard about them, in fragments, in whispers, in the careful silences that adults wrapped around certain names. They were a motorcycle club. They wore black leather cuts with a patch on the back, a highway stretching into a storm cloud, stitched in silver and dark blue thread. They were loud. They were large. They occupied space the way oak trees occupy soil, not aggressively, but with a permanence that suggested they had been here before the concrete and would remain after it crumbled. Nobody on this side of the city called the cops on the highway saints, but nobody ran from them either. They existed in a gray territory between fear and familiarity, like a scar on a neighborhood's face that had been there so long people forgot to notice it. Theo stood across the street in the rain for 11 minutes. He watched shadows move behind the frosted garage windows. He heard muffled voices, the clank of tools, the deep idle of an engine being tested. Music, something old and heavy with bass guitar, leaked through the walls. He crossed the street. The side door of the garage was steel, dented at the bottom from years of being kicked open by men carrying engine parts. Theo pushed it. It didn't move. He pushed harder, leaning his entire 57 pounds against the metal, and the door groaned open 6 inches, enough for a boy his size to slip through sideways. The heat hit him first, then the smell, motor oil, welding flux, cigarette smoke, leather, coffee that had been on a burner for 6 hours, and beneath it all, the sharp ozone scent of electrical work. The garage was enormous from the inside, or felt enormous, because the ceiling was high and the space was filled with machines in various states of dismemberment. Bike frames hung from ceiling hooks. Engines sat on wooden benches beside surgical arrangements of bolts and gaskets. Fluorescent tube lights ran in parallel rows overhead, some of them flickering in arrhythmic patterns that made the shadows jump. 19 men occupied this space. Some stood at workbenches, some sat on overturned milk crates near a kerosene heater in the corner. Some leaned against their bikes with arms crossed, talking in low voices that carried the specific cadence of men who had learned to speak quietly in places where volume attracted the wrong kind of attention. They were not what Theo expected. Or maybe they were exactly what he expected, and what surprised him was that he wasn't more afraid. They were large, not all of them, but enough. Thick arms sleeved in tattoos, beards, weathered faces, hands that looked like they'd been built for damage and repurposed for repair. They wore the black leather cuts he'd seen from across the street, the highway and storm patch visible on every back, and beneath the cuts, flannel shirts and thermal Henleys and work boots caked in grease. But it was their eyes that stopped Theo in the doorway. Every man in that garage turned to look at him within 3 seconds of his entry, and not a single pair of those eyes held the thing Theo feared most: indifference. They didn't look at him the way Mrs. Devlin had looked at him, or the desk sergeant, or the social worker, or the detective, with professional distance calibrated to protect the observer from the weight of what was being observed. They looked at him the way people look at something they recognize. The room went quiet. The music continued, but everything else, The conversations, the tools, the small movements of men occupying shared space ceased. A man stepped forward from the far end of the garage. Ryder Kane was 44 years old. He stood 6'2" with the kind of posture that came not from vanity, but from years of standing in rooms where slouching was interpreted as weakness. His hair was dark, cut close, threaded with gray at the temples. His face was angular, hard-boned, with a scar running from the corner of his left eye to his jawline. Not a dramatic scar, not a movie scar, but a quiet one, thin and white, the kind left by something sharp that happened fast. He wore the president's patch on his cut, a single rocker above the club insignia, stitched in block letters. Before the Highway Saints, Ryder Kane had spent 9 years as a corrections officer in a state facility where the average inmate age was 22 and the average sentence was long enough to transform boys into something the system couldn't categorize. He'd walked cell blocks at 3 a.m. He'd listened to men scream in their sleep. He'd watched the machinery of institutional authority grind human beings into compliance and called it rehabilitation until the word tasted like copper in his mouth. He quit on a Tuesday. Bought a Harley on a Wednesday. Rode until the highway ran out of names and the silence between cities felt more honest than anything he'd heard inside concrete walls. That was 11 years ago. The Highway Saints existed before Ryder, but what they became after he took the gavel was something different, something the members themselves couldn't fully articulate. They were still loud, still rough, still occupying the margins where polite society stored the things it didn't want to examine. But under Ryder's hand, the club had developed a gravitational pull for damaged men seeking something between destruction and redemption. Ryder looked at the boy standing in his garage doorway, soaking wet, wearing a jacket 3 sizes too large, and he didn't ask who he was or how he got in or whether his parents knew where he was. He asked, "When's the last time you ate?" Theo blinked. Nobody had asked him that, not at school, not at the precinct, not in the counselor's office with its motivational stickers and yellow legal pads. The question bypassed every defense he'd built and landed somewhere beneath his ribs where hunger lived, alongside everything else he'd learned to ignore. "Yesterday," Theo said. "Lunch? At school?" Ryder nodded once. He turned to a man sitting near the kerosene heater, a thick-necked biker with a red beard and hands like catcher's mitts, and said, "Coop, the sandwich." The man called Coop reached behind the heater without a word, produced a wrapped deli sandwich from a brown paper bag, and tossed it across the garage. Ryder caught it one-handed and held it out to Theo. Theo took it. He unwrapped it slowly, methodically, the way he did everything, counting the motions, controlling the sequence, maintaining the small rituals of order that kept him from flying apart. Turkey and Swiss on rye. Yellow mustard. The bread was slightly stale, but the meat was cold and real, and he ate half of it before he remembered that he'd come here for a reason. "I need something," Theo said between bites. His voice was thin but level. "I need a noise loud enough to scare a man." The garage held its silence the way a held breath holds the body still. Ryder didn't respond immediately. He studied the boy with an expression that had no performance in it, no warmth manufactured for the occasion, no authority deployed to establish hierarchy. Just attention. The undivided, unblinking attention of a man who had spent nearly a decade watching faces for the truths that mouths refused to speak. "What man?" Ryder asked. Quiet. No inflection. "My mom's boyfriend." "Where's your mom now?" "Home." "Where's he?" "Home." Ryder's jaw tightened. An almost invisible motion, like a cable, pulled one notch tighter inside the architecture of his face. He glanced sideways at the man standing 3 feet to his left, Cole Maddox. Cole was 39. He was not tall, but he was dense, constructed like a piece of furniture designed to survive being thrown across a room. His arms were sleeved in ink from wrist to shoulder, mechanical gears, engine parts, clock faces with no hands, and a set of Roman numerals across his left forearm that he never explained and nobody asked about. His face was blunt, scarred across the bridge of the nose, and his eyes were the pale blue of winter sky seen through dirty glass. Cole Maddox had grown up in a house where the man of the house used a belt for things that had nothing to do with holding up pants. He left at 16. He'd lived in cars, in shelters, beneath overpasses where the road noise was loud enough to cover the sound of a teenager grinding his teeth in his sleep. He found the Saints at 23, when Ryder pulled him out of a bar fight he was losing on purpose, because losing felt more familiar than winning. Cole had not spoken about his childhood in 16 years, but when Theo Mercer said the words, "my mom's boyfriend," Cole's hands, resting at his sides, loose and still, closed into fists so slowly and so completely that his knuckles turned the color of bone. He knew. Every man in that garage knew. Not because Theo had explained the details, not because they'd seen evidence. They knew because the knowledge lived inside them, carried in muscle memory, in the phantom ache of old bruises, in the specific frequency of silence that follows violence in enclosed spaces. Ryder crouched down so he was eye level with Theo. His knees cracked. The leather of his cut creaked. Up close, Theo could see that the scar on Ryder's face was older than it looked. Decades old, faded to a thin ridge of white tissue that caught the fluorescent light. "You came here alone?" Ryder asked. "Yes." "At night?" "Yes." "Through this neighborhood?" Theo nodded. Ryder let out a slow breath. "That's either the bravest or the dumbest thing I've heard this year. I haven't decided which." "Doesn't matter which," Theo said. "I need the noise." A sound came from the back of the garage. Not laughter exactly, but something adjacent to it. A grunt of recognition. It came from a man leaning against a softail near the far wall, his arms crossed over a chest wide enough to use as a workbench. Mason Holt. The others called him Graves. He was 51, the oldest member of the chapter, with a gray beard that reached his collarbone and eyes set deep beneath a brow that looked like it had been carved from sandstone. He'd earned his name not through violence but through persistence. The man simply would not go away. He showed up. He stayed. He outlasted problems the way graves outlast the people who dig them. Graves pushed off the wall and walked toward the boy. His boots on the concrete floor made a sound like slow drum beats. "Kid walked 11 blocks in the rain," Graves said, to no one in particular. "Past the vacant lots, past the rail yard, to ask a room full of strangers for help." He stopped 3 feet from Theo and looked down at him with an expression that was not gentle but was not hard. It was something else. Appraisal. The look of a man measuring whether the thing in front of him was going to break or bend. "That ain't dumb," Graves said. "That's desperate. And desperate means the thing behind him is worse than the thing in front of him." He looked at Ryder. "So what's behind him, Prez?" Ryder stood up. He looked at Theo. "Tell them what you told me." And Theo did. He told them about the 5-second nights and the 7-second nights. He told them about the social worker who checked 3 boxes. He told them about the precinct and the detective who called him brave. He told them about the stairwell and the garbage bags and the look on his mother's face that wasn't sadness but was something worse. He told them about the fire alarm. 6 weeks ago, someone in the building had burned something on a stove and the alarm system activated. A shrieking building-wide siren that bounced off concrete walls and filled every apartment with sound so loud it turned the air solid. Dale Whitford, who had been mid-sentence in the middle of something terrible, froze, then ran, grabbed his jacket and bolted out the front door like a man who'd heard a sound he couldn't control and couldn't tolerate and couldn't absorb. For 11 minutes, Theo counted, the apartment was safe. Not because anyone intervened, not because the system activated, because noise filled the space where silence had been, and the man who fed on silence couldn't survive in the noise. "So I figured," Theo said, his voice cracking for the first time, "if I could find something loud enough." He stopped. He looked at the 19 Harleys parked in ordered rows behind the men who rode them. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The silence that followed was not empty. It was pressurized. It was the silence of 19 men confronting the reflection of their own damage in the face of a child, and understanding that the next words spoken in this room would determine whether they were the kind of men who looked away, or the kind who turned their engines toward the thing that needed to be shaken apart. Ryder looked at Cole. Cole looked at Graves. Graves looked at the row of Harleys, their chrome catching the fluorescent light like a line of weapons waiting to be unsheathed. "When does he hit?" Ryder asked Theo. "After midnight. When the neighbors sleep." "Every night?" "Not every night, but you can't tell which nights." Ryder nodded. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He didn't light one. He just held the pack, turning it slowly in his fingers, the way a man holds something small when his hands need a task to keep them from doing something larger. "Go home," Ryder told Theo. The boy's face collapsed. Not dramatically. Not with tears or protest. It collapsed the way a building collapses in slow motion. From the inside, the structural supports giving way one by one, while the exterior holds its shape for a few more seconds. "Go home," Ryder repeated. "Eat the rest of that sandwich. Lock your bedroom door. And when you hear engines tonight—" He paused. "Don't be scared." Theo stared at him, searching, reading, counting the seconds the way he always counted, measuring the distance between what was promised and what was real. Then something in this boy's face shifted. A muscle near his jaw released. His shoulders, which had been drawn up near his ears since he entered the garage, dropped half an inch. He didn't say thank you. He didn't smile. He just nodded, once, with the seriousness of a person who had just been told that the world contained something he had stopped believing existed. He turned. He slipped back through the steel door, into the rain, into the night. And behind him, inside Black Hollow Garage, Ryder Kane set the pack of cigarettes on the nearest workbench and looked at his brothers. "Church," he said quietly. The word moved through the room like an electrical current. Men straightened. Conversations that had been held in abeyance resumed and terminated within seconds. Bodies shifted toward the long table at the back of the garage. A scarred wooden surface covered in ring stains and cigarette burns where the highway saints conducted the only business that mattered. They sat. 19 men around a table built for 12, shoulders pressed together, leather creaking, the kerosene heater ticking in the corner. Ryder spoke first. "I know what that kid's carrying. Some of you know too, and I'm not going to ask anyone to raise a hand or share a story tonight because that's not what this is about." He put both palms flat on the table. "What this is about is a 12-year-old who walked through the worst blocks in this city alone, at night, to ask us for help. He didn't go to the cops. He didn't go to the school. He came here. Which means either the entire system has failed that boy, or we're the last door left." Silence. Cole Maddox spoke. His voice was low, stripped of everything except the load it carried. "What's the play?" Ryder looked around the table. Every face looked back. "The kid said noise scared the man once. The fire alarm. 11 minutes of peace." He paused. "I'm thinking we give him more than 11 minutes. Graves leaned back in his chair. The wood groaned. "You talking about rolling on a civilian?" "I'm talking about parking on a public street," Ryder said, "with legally registered motorcycles, and sitting there." "How many?" "All of us." "When?" "Tonight." The table went quiet again. Not because anyone disagreed, but because every man in that room understood what Ryder was really asking. He wasn't asking them to ride. He was asking them to stand between a violent man and a woman and child they'd never met, not with fists or threats, but with presence. The unbearable, unignorable weight of being seen. And for men who had spent their lives learning to disappear, into bottles, into speed, into silence, into the comfortable anonymity of the road, choosing to be seen was the most terrifying thing Ryder had ever asked of them. Cole spoke again. "I'm in." Graves. "I'm in." Then Coop. Then a wiry biker named Dutch who hadn't said a word all night. Then a kid barely 22 who everyone called Nails because he'd driven a framing nail through his own hand on a construction job and finished the shift. One by one, around the table, until every man had spoken 2 words and the decision was unanimous. Ryder stood. "We roll at 2, full formation, no words, no contact. We park, we sit, and we let the machines talk." He looked at Cole. "And tomorrow morning, you walk that kid to school." Cole's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes, something old and deep and locked inside a room he hadn't opened in 16 years, shifted, like a door cracking, like a sound escaping from a place where sound had been forbidden. He nodded. Outside, the rain had not stopped. It drummed against the corrugated roof of Black Hollow Garage with the patience of something that intended to last longer than whatever was happening beneath it. The Saints began preparing their bikes. And 6 blocks away, in a 3rd-floor apartment, where the walls were thin and the silence was heavy, and a woman sat in the dark kitchen pressing a bag of frozen peas against her jaw. Theo Mercer lay on his bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. He was counting again, not seconds between impact and silence. Something different this time. He was counting the hours until 2 a.m., when a sound he'd been promised would either save his mother's life or prove that the last door in the world was just as empty as all the others. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in the place where 12-year-old boys store the things too heavy for their bones, a question waited that he could not yet speak aloud. What happens if the noise isn't enough? At 1:47 a.m., Black Hollow Garage smelled like war. Not the kind with bullets. The kind that lives in a man's chest for 20 years and needs only a reason, any reason, to crawl out through his hands. 19 men moved through the garage in silence, pulling on gloves, zipping cuts, checking tire pressure with the focused precision of soldiers preparing for a mission none of them would admit was personal. But it was personal. Every inch of it. Cole Maddox sat on his Dynalo rider and didn't move. His hands rested on the handlebars, but his knuckles were white, drained of color, and his jaw worked in small circles as though he were chewing on something that refused to break down. The kerosene heater had been shut off. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped inside glass. The temperature inside the garage had dropped 15 degrees in the last hour because someone had left the bay door cracked and the November air was crawling across the concrete floor like something searching for exposed skin. Cole didn't feel the cold. He hadn't felt cold in 16 years. What he felt instead was a specific kind of heat, a low, cancerous burn behind his sternum that ignited every time the world presented him with evidence that the thing he'd survived as a boy was still happening right now to someone else, in the next building, in the next apartment, behind the next closed door. He was 9 the first time his father broke something that belonged to him, a model airplane, balsa wood and glue. Cole had built it over 3 weeks using instructions he'd found in a library book, and his father had stepped on it deliberately. Not in anger, not in any identifiable emotion, but with the calm, measured precision of a man teaching a child that nothing he built would survive in this house. Cole was 11 the first time the breaking moved from objects to bones. He hadn't told Ryder this. He hadn't told anyone, but the knowledge sat inside him like a stone in a river, invisible from the surface, altering every current that passed over it. Ryder walked down the line of bikes, checking formation. His boots hit the concrete in a steady rhythm. He didn't speak to anyone individually. He didn't need to. Each man received a look, brief, direct, loaded, and each man returned it. The communication was subcutaneous. It moved through leather and muscle and scar tissue. At the end of the line, Ryder stopped. "No words when we get there," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the garage the way engine noise fills a tunnel, not by volume, but by occupying every available space. "Nobody dismounts unless I dismount first. Nobody approaches the building. Nobody speaks to anyone who comes outside. We sit, we idle, and we let the sound do the work." He paused. "If the law shows up, I talk. Nobody else. We're parked on a public street. We're not blocking traffic. We're not trespassing. We're sitting on registered motorcycles in a legal formation. Anyone asks why, we're waiting for a brother who lives in the area." "Which brother?" Dutch asked from somewhere in the middle of the formation. "Me," Ryder said. "I live wherever I say I live." That got a low murmur. Not laughter. Something grimmer. The sound men make when they recognize the specific brand of bureaucratic jujitsu that turns the system's own rules into shields for the people the system forgot to protect. Ryder swung a leg over his Road King. The bike settled beneath his weight with the familiar groan of suspension-absorbing mass. He turned the key. The dashboard lit up, a small constellation of amber and green in the dark garage. "One more thing," he said without turning around. "Some of you are going to feel something when we get there. Something old. Something you locked up. I'm not going to tell you to control it because I can't control mine either." Silence. "But that boy asked for noise, not violence, and we're going to give him exactly what he asked for, nothing more." He kicked the engine alive. The sound was enormous. Not loud. Enormous. It came up through the concrete floor and into the bones of every man in that garage. a deep mechanical heartbeat that shook the air and the walls and the dust on the fluorescent light casings. One by one, 18 other engines joined it, each adding its own frequency to the collective roar until the sound inside Black Hollow Garage was no longer something you heard. It was something you inhabited. The bay door rolled up. Rain and streetlight flooded in. Ryder led them out. The formation moved through the streets of the Lower East Side in a double column, two abreast, headlights cutting parallel lines through the rain. The wet asphalt reflected their lights back at them, chrome and white and amber bouncing off the road surface like the city itself was watching their approach. They passed the bodega on the corner. The owner, a Dominican man named Felix, who played radio all night and minded his own business as a matter of survival, stepped to his doorway and watched 19 motorcycles roll past his shop at 2 in the morning. He didn't call anyone. He didn't go back inside. He stood in his doorway with a cup of coffee in his hand and watched the way a man watches something he doesn't understand but recognizes as necessary. They passed the laundromat, the vacant lots, the rail yard where rust and weeds had consumed everything the city had abandoned. Then they turned onto Theo's street. The apartment building was a 5-story concrete rectangle with fire escapes clinging to its face like metal skeletons. Half the windows were dark. A few flickered with the blue glow of televisions. The third floor, second window from the left, Theo's apartment, was completely dark. Ryder raised his left fist. The formation stopped. 19 Harleys idled in a line that stretched nearly half a block, their engines creating a wall of sound that pressed against the building's facade like an invisible hand. The vibration traveled through the asphalt, up through the foundation, into the walls, through the floors, into every apartment on every level. It was not subtle. It was not meant to be. They sat. Rain collected on their shoulders, on the chrome of their handlebars, on the leather of their cuts. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Their headlights illuminated the front of the building in overlapping cones of white light that made the concrete glow as though lit from within. 40 seconds. A minute. 90 seconds. A light went on in a second-floor window. A curtain moved. A face appeared. Elderly, female, confused, then disappeared. 2 minutes. The engines continued. The sound was relentless, patient, a mechanical presence that refused to end or explain itself. Then the third floor. Not Theo's window. The window next to it. The living room. A light snapped on. The curtain jerked sideways. And there he was. Dale Whitford stood in the window in a white undershirt and boxer shorts, squinting into the headlights below, with the disoriented fury of a man torn from sleep by something he couldn't categorize. His face was visible for only a moment, red, puffy, creased from the pillow. But in that moment, illuminated by 19 headlights, he looked exactly like what he was. A man caught. Not by evidence, not by law, by attention. Dale stared down at the motorcycles. The motorcycles stared back. He opened the window. Cold air and engine noise rushed in. He leaned out 2 inches, 3 inches, and shouted something that the sound swallowed whole. His mouth moved. His face contorted. But the engines ate his words the way they were designed to eat silence, completely, without remainder. Nobody on the bikes reacted. Nobody looked up. They sat motionless, faces forward, rain dripping from the brims of their helmets and the peaks of their shoulders, and they let the man scream into a sound that was bigger than anything his voice could produce. Dale pulled back inside. The window slammed shut. The curtain fell. 30 seconds later, the apartment door on the third floor opened and closed, audible even over the engines because of how hard it was slammed. Footsteps hammered down the interior stairwell. The building's front door burst open. Dale Whitford stood on the front steps in an unzipped jacket and unlaced boots, his breath making rapid clouds in the cold air, his eyes scanning the row of motorcycles with the particular terror of a man who has built his entire life around controlling enclosed spaces and is now standing in an open one. He looked at the bikes, at the men, at the silent, rain-soaked, leather-clad wall of human machinery that occupied his street. "The hell is this?" he shouted. No response. Engines idled. Rain fell. "I said, what the hell is this?" Louder now, his voice cracking at the edges. Ryder sat at the front of the formation. He did not look at Dale. He looked straight ahead, down the empty street, as though the man screaming on the steps were a sound effect that didn't require acknowledgement. Dale took one step down, then another. He was on the sidewalk now, 10 feet from the nearest bike. Coops, a matte black street glide that squatted on the asphalt like a resting animal. "You got 5 seconds to move these bikes or I'm calling the cops." Ryder's eyes shifted. Not his head, not his body, just his eyes. They moved to Dale's face and held there. The look lasted 3 seconds. Dale stopped walking. Whatever he saw in those eyes, whatever frequency of controlled, compressed, carefully stored damage was visible in Ryder Kane's expression at 2 in the morning in the rain on a street where a 12-year-old boy was listening from behind a dark window. It stopped Dale Whitford's forward motion as completely as a physical barrier. He stood on the sidewalk, wet, cold, surrounded by sound and light and the immovable presence of men who would not speak to him, would not threaten him, would not give him anything his rage could grip. And for the first time in 3 years, Dale experienced the thing he had been inflicting on others, powerlessness. He went back inside. The door slammed. 12 minutes later, the apartment door opened again. Dale came out carrying a duffel bag. He walked to a silver sedan parked at the curb, threw the bag in the back seat, got in, and drove away without looking back. Ryder watched the taillights disappear around the corner. He waited 30 seconds. Then he raised his left hand and drew a circle in the air, the signal to cut engines. 19 motorcycles went silent simultaneously. The absence of sound was almost violent. It pressed against the ears like a physical weight. Rain filled the void, thin, cold, steady, and beneath it, the neighborhood exhaled. Ryder looked up at the third-floor window. A small face appeared behind the glass, pale, wide-eyed, pressed against the pane so hard that breath fogged a circle around the nose and mouth. Theo. Ryder didn't wave, didn't nod. He held the boy's gaze for 5 seconds, the same duration Theo had learned to count between impact and recovery, and then he looked away. The formation rolled out the way it had rolled in, slow, controlled. 19 machines moving through wet streets toward a garage that smelled like oil and coffee, and the particular exhaustion of men who had just done something that would cost them sleep for reasons they couldn't explain. Back at the garage, nobody spoke for a long time. The bikes were parked, engines cooled. The kerosene heater was relit. Men peeled off wet gloves and hung them on hooks and stood around the space with the strange, heavy-limbed stillness of people coming down from something that wasn't adrenaline but felt adjacent to it. Cole sat on his bike for 9 minutes after everyone else had dismounted. His hands were still on the grips. His eyes were open but focused on something that wasn't in the room. Something that existed in a house he hadn't visited in 23 years. In a room with a model airplane crushed on the floor and a man's boot print in the balsa wood. Graves noticed. He walked over slowly, his boots making their drumbeat sound on the concrete, and stopped 2 feet from Cole's left handlebar. "You good?" Cole didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was wrong, stripped, like a wire with the insulation pulled off. "I keep thinking about what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, you walk the kid to school. That's what Ryder said." "That's not what I mean." Cole looked at Graves. His blue eyes were wet, but not from rain. "I mean tomorrow night, and the night after. Dale runs tonight because we're loud and we're new and he doesn't know what we are. But he comes back. Men like that always come back. And we can't park 19 bikes on that street every night for the rest of that kid's life." Graves was quiet. He pulled a cigarette from behind his ear, lit it with a match. He never used lighters, never explained why, and let the smoke leak from his nose in 2 thin streams. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we just made a promise to a 12-year-old, and I need to know we can keep it." "You asking me or telling me?" "I'm asking Ryder, but he's not here." Ryder was, in fact, standing in the small office at the back of the garage, a cluttered room with a metal desk, a rotary phone that hadn't worked in 4 years, and a corkboard covered in club business. He was on his cell phone. The door was closed but not latched, and the conversation was audible to anyone standing within 6 feet. Graves heard fragments. A name. Lena Mercer. An address. A question about prior reports, prior complaints, prior incidents filed under different names in different counties. Then a name that Graves didn't recognize, spoken by whoever was on the other end of the line, with enough weight to make Ryder sit down on the edge of the metal desk. The call ended. Ryder came out of the office. His face had changed. Not visibly. Not in any way that someone unfamiliar with him would notice. But the men who had ridden with Ryder Kane for years could read the architecture of his expression the way mechanics read engine sounds. And what they saw now was a new load added to a structure already carrying more than its rated capacity. "Sit down," Ryder said to Cole and Graves. Then louder, "Everyone sit down!" The men gathered. Not at the church table. This wasn't formal. They pulled up crates, leaned against workbenches, sat on the edges of bike frames. Wet leather creaked. Someone coughed. The heater ticked. "I made a call," Ryder said. "Got a friend in county records. Ran the boyfriend's name." He paused. Not for effect. For the kind of breath a person takes before delivering news that changes the weight of everything that came before it. Dale Whitford isn't just a guy who hits his girlfriend. He's got a trail, 4 counties, 3 states, 2 protective orders that expired, 1 aggravated assault charge that got pleaded down to misdemeanor battery because the victim recanted. He looked around the room. Different women. Different addresses. Same pattern. He moves in. He isolates. He escalates. And when it gets hot, he runs. New city. New name on the lease. New woman who doesn't know what she's living with until the door is locked and the neighbors are asleep. The silence in the garage thickened. Not with shock. These men were not easily shocked. With recognition. The pattern Ryder described was familiar to every man in the room, not because they'd studied it, but because some of them had lived inside it. Some of them had been the child pressed against the wall, counting seconds between impact and silence. "How many?" Cole asked. His voice was flat, empty of everything except the question. "That my contact could find?" 4 confirmed, probably more. "Kids involved?" Ryder looked at Cole for a long time. "In 2 of them." Cole stood up, not fast. Not with any dramatic motion. He simply stood, the way a man stands when sitting becomes physically unbearable, when the body can no longer contain what the mind is processing in a seated position. "Where does this go, Ryder?" "I'm handing everything to a contact at the county sheriff's office, a deputy named Ortiz. She's clean, she's sharp. And she's been trying to build a case on this guy for 8 months but couldn't locate him because he keeps moving. We just located him." Ryder confirmed. Graves crushed his cigarette on the concrete with his boot. "So we're doing police work now?" "We're doing what the police couldn't. There's a difference." "Is there?" Graves looked at Ryder without hostility but without deference. It was the look of an older man who had seen enough well-intentioned missions collapse under the weight of their own ambition. "We rolled on a domestic situation tonight. We made a man run. That feels good. That feels right. But what happens when this Dale figures out we're just noise? What happens when he comes back sober and angry and looking for the people who humiliated him?" "He won't come back," Ryder said. "You don't know that." "No, I don't. But I know that the boy who walked into this garage didn't have anywhere else to go. And I know that we didn't turn him away. And I know that once you don't turn someone away, you own what comes next. All of it." The weight of that sentence landed on the room like a change in air pressure. Every man felt it. The heater ticked. Rain drummed on the roof. Somewhere outside, a dog barked at something no one else could hear. "So here's what comes next," Ryder continued. "Tomorrow morning, Cole walks Theo to school. Tomorrow afternoon, Graves opens the shop and starts teaching the kid engines. Tomorrow night, we have someone on that street, not 19 bikes. 1, parked, visible, rotating shifts." He looked around the table. "And I take everything we've got on Dale Whitford to Deputy Ortiz and we start building something the system can actually hold. A case with teeth, corroborating victims, a pattern of flight, an active address." "And Lena?" Cole asked. "What about her?" "She didn't call us. Her kid did. For all we know, she's terrified we just made everything worse." Ryder exhaled through his nose, a long, slow breath that carried something heavier than air. "I know." "So what do we say to her?" "Nothing. Yet. We don't show up at her door like another group of men telling her what to do with her life. We wait. We let Theo be the bridge. And when she's ready to talk, she talks. On her terms. Cole stared at Ryder. Something moved behind his eyes. Not disagreement, but the particular ache of a man who understood exactly how long, when she's ready, could take, because he had watched his own mother stay in a house of breaking things for 7 years past the point where anyone on the outside would have called it a choice. It was never a choice. It was a cage built from fear and isolation and the systematic destruction of every exit route until the only door left was the one the abuser controlled. Cole sat back down. The meeting broke. Men drifted toward their bikes, toward the door, toward whatever waited for them in apartments and rented rooms across the city. Graves stayed behind, dragging an old mini-bike frame from the storage area at the back of the garage. A rusted Briggs & Stratton with a seized engine and handlebars bent 15 degrees off, true. "What are you doing?" Ryder asked. "Getting the kid's first project ready. It's 3 in the morning, and the kid is laying awake right now counting the minutes until someone tells him it was all a dream." Graves set the frame on a workbench and stared at it. "I'm giving him something to touch tomorrow. Something real. Something that needs fixing. Because when I was his age, the only thing that kept me together was the fact that a broken engine doesn't lie to you. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It's just broken. And you either fix it or you don't." Ryder watched Graves for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then he left. The garage emptied. The lights stayed on. Graves never turned them off when he was working. And the old man stood alone at the bench, his thick fingers moving over the rusted engine parts with a tenderness that no one who knew him only by reputation would have believed. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The sky didn't clear. It simply transitioned from active water to suspended mist, the kind that hangs in the air like a held breath. 6 blocks away, on the 3rd floor of a concrete apartment building, Theo Mercer was not asleep. He was sitting on the floor of his mother's bedroom. Lena was on the bed, awake, her eyes open in the dark, her hand resting on the edge of the mattress where Theo could reach it. Neither of them spoke. The apartment was quiet, genuinely quiet, not the forced silence of a house holding its breath for the next impact, but the strange, unfamiliar quiet of a space that had been emptied of its threat. Dale's toothbrush was still in the bathroom. His boots were still by the door. His jacket, the good one, the one he wore when he wanted to look like someone who didn't do the things he did, was still hanging on the hook in the hallway. He would come back for these things. Theo knew it. Lena knew it. But for now, in this hour, in this silence that was not a weapon but an absence, the boy held his mother's hand and listened to her breathe, and for the first time in 3 years, the sound between her breaths was not fear. It was space. Room to exist without calculating the next impact. Theo closed his eyes, and in the back of his mind, behind the counting and the measuring and the mechanical vigilance that had kept him alive for 3 years, a new thought formed, fragile, dangerous, almost too heavy to hold. What if it lasts? He opened his eyes. Because he already knew the answer. It wouldn't last. Not unless someone made it last. Not unless the men on those motorcycles were something more than a single night of noise. Not unless the world had changed in some fundamental way between midnight and now, and Theo Mercer, who had learned at 9 years old that the world did not change, it only rearranged its cruelties, was not ready to believe that. Not yet. But 6 blocks away, in a garage that smelled like rust and oil and cigarette smoke, a 51-year-old man with a gray beard and deep-set eyes was rebuilding a mini bike engine at 3 in the morning, and he was doing it for a boy he'd met 2 hours ago. And if you had asked Mason Holt why, he would not have been able to tell you. Or he would have told you the only truth he knew. Because someone should have done it for me. And on the other side of the city, in a silver sedan parked in the lot of a gas station that closed at midnight, Dale Whitford sat behind the wheel with the engine running and the heater on and his hands shaking. Not from cold, not from fear, but from the specific rage of a man whose control has been interrupted. He picked up his phone. He made a call. And the voice that answered on the other end said 2 words that would change everything the Highway Saints thought they understood about the danger they had just stepped into. "Come home." Come home. 2 words. That was all it took to turn a man running from 19 motorcycles into something worse than a man running. Dale Whitford sat in the gas station parking lot with his phone pressed against his ear and his breathing slowing down. Not calming, not settling, but reorganizing into the controlled rhythm of a person who has just remembered that he is not alone in the world and never has been. The voice on the phone belonged to his brother, Travis Whitford, 47 years old, 12 miles north, in a county where the streetlights ended and the roads turned to gravel, and the only law that mattered was the law you could enforce with your own hands. Dale didn't explain what had happened. He didn't need to. The Whitford brothers had a language older than words. A system of silences and half-sentences developed over decades in a household where their father had taught them both that control was not a behavior, but a birthright. What you owned, you controlled. What you controlled, you kept. And anything that disrupted that control was not a problem to be solved, but an invasion to be punished. How many? Travis asked. I don't know, 15, 20, bikes, club? Yeah. A pause. The sound of ice in a glass. Travis thinking. Travis was always the one who thought. Dale was the hand, Travis was the architecture behind it. Which club? I don't know, never seen them before. Some highway patch. You get a name? I got out of there. Another pause. Longer this time. The ice again. Come home, Travis repeated. We'll figure this out. Dale put the car in drive. The headlights swept across the empty gas station lot, illuminating a dumpster, a broken air pump, and 30 feet of cracked asphalt before the road swallowed everything into darkness. He drove north. And behind him, in a city that was just beginning to understand what the highway saints had done, the clock started on something none of them had anticipated. Because Dale Whitford was not a solo predator. He was a franchise. Morning arrived like a wound opening. Gray light leaked through the clouds over the east side, turning the wet streets into dull mirrors that reflected nothing worth seeing. The temperature had dropped overnight. Frost clung to car windshields and fire escapes, and the chrome of a single Harley-Davidson parked at the curb in front of Theo Mercer's apartment building. Cole Maddox had been there since 5 a.m. He sat on the bike with the engine off, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of gas station coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. He wore his cut-over a thermal Henley, no hat, no scarf. The cold had turned the tips of his ears red, and his breath came out in short clouds that dissolved before they cleared his chin. His eyes were fixed on the building's front door. He hadn't slept. Not because he'd chosen to stay awake, but because every time he closed his eyes in his apartment after leaving the garage, he saw the same thing, a model airplane on a carpet and a boot coming down. The image was 30 years old. It hadn't faded. It had simply been filed in a drawer he didn't open, and last night, watching Theo's face in that third-floor window, small and pale and pressed against the glass, someone had ripped that drawer open and scattered its contents across the floor of his mind. At 7:14 a.m., the building's front door opened. Theo came out wearing the same gray hoodie, the same oversized jacket, and a backpack that hung from his shoulders like it was filled with something heavier than textbooks. He stopped on the top step when he saw Cole. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Theo studied the man on the motorcycle the way he studied everything, systematically, measuring, cataloging. The tattoos, the scar across the nose, the pale blue eyes that looked like they'd been manufactured in the same factory as Winter. You're one of them, Theo said. Not a question. Yeah. The one who was standing next to the tall guy. Yeah. Theo came down the steps slowly. He stopped on the sidewalk 5 feet from the bike. The distance was precise, close enough to talk, far enough to run. My mom didn't sleep, Theo said. Did you? No. Cole nodded. He took a sip of the cold coffee, grimaced, and poured the rest onto the curb. I'm walking you to school, he said. Why? Because that's what I was told to do. By the tall guy? By Ryder, yeah. Theo looked at Cole's motorcycle, then at the street, then back at Cole. He's coming back, Theo said. His voice was flat, matter of fact. The voice of a boy who had learned to predict danger the way farmers predict weather, not with hope, but with data. Maybe, Cole said. Not maybe. He always comes back. He came back after the cops. He came back after the social worker. He came back after my mom locked the door and pushed the couch against it. He came back every time. Cole swung his leg off the bike. He stood on the sidewalk next to Theo, and for the first time, the boy could see the full scope of the man beside him. Not tall, but built like a compacted version of something much larger, as though the world had tried to crush him and succeeded only in making him denser. Then we'll be here when he does, Cole said. They walked. The route to Theo's school was 9 blocks through a neighborhood that existed in the permanent twilight between neglected and abandoned. Shuttered storefronts with plywood over their windows, a check-cashing place with iron bars on every surface, a diner called Moretti's that had been open since before anyone could remember and served coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with resentment. They walked in silence for 3 blocks. Cole matched Theo's pace. Shorter strides, slower cadence. He didn't try to fill the quiet. He understood, in a way that most adults didn't, that silence between 2 people who had both lived inside violence was not uncomfortable. It was a shared language, a mutual acknowledgement that words were expensive and neither of them could afford to waste them. At the 4th block, Theo spoke. "What happened to your nose?" Cole touched the bridge of his nose without thinking. The scar there was old and thick, a ridge of white tissue that bisected the bone. "A man hit me with a phone book when I was 14. Theo processed this. His face didn't change, but his stride shortened by half an inch, a microscopic flinch that Cole caught because he'd spent his entire life watching for exactly that kind of involuntary response. "A phone book doesn't leave a scar like that," Theo said. "It does if he does it 9 times. Silence. They crossed the street. A city bus passed, throwing up a spray of gutter water that neither of them bothered to dodge. Cole's jeans were soaked from the knee down. Theo's sneakers squelched on the pavement. "Was it your dad?" Theo asked. "Yeah." "Did anyone help?" Cole didn't answer immediately. They walked past a vacant lot where a shopping cart lay on its side in a puddle of rainwater, its metal frame rusted into the color of dried blood. "No," Cole said finally. "Nobody helped." "Then why are you helping me?" Cole stopped walking. Theo took 2 more steps before realizing he was alone, then turned back. Cole stood on the sidewalk with his hands in the pockets of his cut, rain mist collecting on his shoulders, and looked at the boy with an expression that Theo had never seen on any adult face directed at him. It was not pity, not warmth, not the manufactured concern of counselors and social workers. It was something rawer than all of those things. The specific look of a man confronting the version of himself that still existed in a broken house 30 years ago, and understanding for the first time that the child he couldn't save then was standing in front of him now in a different body. "Because nobody should have to walk alone," Cole said. They resumed walking. Neither spoke again until they reached the school. At the gate, Theo stopped. He looked at Cole. "Will you be here when I get out?" "I'll be here." Theo nodded. He adjusted his backpack. He walked through the gate without looking back, but his shoulders, which had been drawn up near his ears for the entire walk, were half an inch lower than they'd been when he left his apartment. Cole watched until the boy disappeared through the school doors. Then he turned around, walked back the 9 blocks to his motorcycle, sat down on the cold leather seat, and put his head in his hands. He stayed like that for 4 minutes. His shoulders didn't shake. No sound came out. But something was happening behind his hands, behind his closed eyes, in the private darkness where Cole Maddox kept every unprocessed moment of his entire life stacked like engine parts in a storage room that had run out of space. Then he straightened up, started the bike, rode to the garage. Black Hollow was already awake when Cole arrived. Graves was at the workbench with the mini-bike frame, surrounded by a constellation of rusted parts that he'd sorted into categories: salvageable, questionable, and beyond help. Ryder was in the office, on the phone, pacing a tight circle between the metal desk and the corkboard. Cole parked, pulled off his gloves, walked to the coffee maker and poured something that barely qualified as liquid. "Kid make it to school?" Graves asked without looking up from a carburetor he was cleaning with a wire brush. "Yeah." "You say anything?" "He asked me why I'm helping him." Graves paused his brushing. He looked at Cole. What'd you tell him? Something honest. Graves went back to the carburetor. The wire brush made a sound like a small animal scratching at a wall. The office door opened. Ryder came out. His face had the same altered geometry it had carried since last night. The same additional weight behind the eyes. The same tension in the jaw. But now there was something else. Something that looked like the particular anger of a man who has just learned that a problem he thought was local is actually structural. "Sit down," Ryder said. Cole and Graves exchanged a look. The last time Ryder had said "sit down" in that tone, it preceded the revelation about Dale's history across 4 counties. Whatever came next was heavier. They sat. Ryder pulled a crate across the floor and sat facing them. "I talked to Ortiz this morning, the deputy. I gave her everything, Dale's current address, the pattern, the priors. And? She's interested. She's very interested. She's been building a file on Dale for the better part of a year. She's got a victim in another county willing to testify. She's got evidence of flight. She thinks she can put together enough for a warrant." "So what's the problem?" Cole asked. Ryder rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, a gesture Cole had seen him make exactly 3 times in 11 years, always before delivering information that would require the room to fundamentally reassess what it thought it knew. "The problem is Dale Whitford has a brother." The garage held its silence. "Travis Whitford, older by 3 years, lives north of the county line. Ortiz knows him. The sheriff's office knows him. Everybody up there knows him." "Who is he?" Graves asked. Ryder looked at Graves with an expression that was not fear. Ryder Kane did not have a face that could produce fear, but was instead the careful calculation of a man weighing how much truth a room can absorb. "Travis Whitford runs a construction crew, 12 guys. Legitimate business on paper. Framing, concrete, roofing, county contracts, permits filed, taxes paid. Clean enough on the surface that nobody's ever made anything stick." He paused. "But Ortiz says the crew moonlights as muscle. Intimidation work. Property disputes, unpaid debts. People who need to be convinced to leave or stay quiet. Travis doesn't get his hands dirty. He subcontracts the pressure. His guys show up at a property. Things happen. People move. Evidence disappears." "How many guys?" Cole asked. His voice had changed. The stripped quality from last night was gone, replaced by something flatter, harder, more mechanical. The voice of a man switching from emotional processing to threat assessment. 12 that Ortiz knows about. Could be more. "Armed?" "Ortiz says assume yes, says. Has Dale called Travis?" Ryder held Cole's gaze. "Ortiz intercepted a call this morning from a burner phone registered to a gas station in the county. 2 calls. One at 2:41 a.m., right after Dale left Theo's street, and one at 6:15 a.m. "What was the 6:15 call?" "That's the one that concerns me." Ryder leaned forward. The 6:15 call lasted 47 seconds. Ortiz doesn't have the content, no warrant yet for a tap. But the cell tower data shows the call originated from a location 8 blocks south of here. The temperature in the garage dropped. Not literally, but every man in the room felt something contract, a physical tightening in the chest and the jaw and the hands. 8 blocks south, Cole repeated. "From here. From this garage. He found us. He found us or Travis found us, doesn't matter which. What matters is they know who we are, and they know where we are, and the first call was panic and the second call was planning." Graves lit a cigarette. His hands were steady. They were always steady. But the match burned a full 3 seconds before he brought it to the cigarette, as though his fingers had momentarily forgotten the sequence. "So we kicked a hornet's nest," Graves said. "We kicked a hornet's nest. And the nest is bigger than we thought, and it has a brother with 12 guys and a reputation for making problems disappear." The 3 men sat in a triangle around the kerosene heater. Rain had started again outside, tapping the corrugated roof in irregular patterns. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere in the garage, a wrench fell from a bench and hit the concrete with a bright metallic clang that made all 3 of them flinch. "Options," Ryder said. "I need options." Cole spoke first. "We pull back. We hand everything to Ortiz. We let the system handle it. We tried that. The system had 8 months and couldn't find the guy. We found him in one night. The system didn't have 19 motorcycles." "Exactly. Which is why we can't pull back now. If we disappear, Dale comes back. If Dale comes back with Travis behind him, Lena and Theo are in more danger than they were before we showed up. So we made it worse, Cole said. Not accusatory, just accurate. The kind of brutal precision that comes from a man who has spent his life measuring outcomes rather than intentions. We changed the equation, Ryder corrected. We didn't know all the variables. We should have. Cole's voice hardened. You should have run the name before we rolled. You should have checked who this guy was, who he was connected to, what was waiting on the other end of his phone. Instead, we showed up blind, loud, and visible, and now a man who hurts women for control is sitting with his brother who hurts people for profit, and they both know our address. The accusation landed in the room like a dropped engine block. Heavy, irretrievable. Ryder's expression didn't change, but his hands, resting on his knees, tightened. The leather of his gloves creaked. You're right, Ryder said. Cole hadn't expected that. His anger, which had been building toward something sharp and directional, stuttered. I should have checked, Ryder continued. I didn't. I saw a scared kid and I reacted, the same way I reacted for 9 years in corrections. Move first, assess later, deal with the consequences when they show up. It worked inside walls. It doesn't work out here. He stood up. But we're here now. The consequences showed up. And pulling back means handing that boy and his mother to a situation we made more dangerous. So pulling back isn't an option. What is the option? Graves asked. Ryder walked to the corkboard in the office. He came back with a piece of paper, a printed map, the kind you get from a county assessor's website, showing property lines and road grids north of the city. Ortiz gave me this. Travis Whitford's property, 40 acres. The construction yard is here. He tapped a spot on the map. And his house is here, half a mile back from the road. One way in, one way out. Gravel road. No neighbors within earshot. You're not seriously considering. I'm not considering anything. I'm showing you the terrain because if Travis decides to send his crew to that apartment building or to this garage or to the school where a 12-year-old boy is sitting in a classroom right now trusting us to be outside when the bell rings, then I need to know the terrain. Cole looked at the map. He looked at Ryder. He looked at Graves. This isn't what we do, Cole said. We're a motorcycle club. We ride. We fix bikes. We show up loud and we leave. We don't do... He gestured at the map. Whatever this is. We didn't used to walk kids to school either, Ryder said quietly. That stopped Cole cold. He stared at Ryder for a long time. The heater ticked. The rain fell. The fluorescent lights buzzed their insect hymn. I walked that kid 9 blocks this morning, Cole said. His voice was different now, not hard, not soft. Something broken that was trying to hold its shape. He asked me if anyone helped me when I was his age, and I told him no. I told him the truth. And now you're telling me that helping him might bring 12 men to his door. I'm telling you it already has, Ryder said. The question isn't whether they're coming. The question is what we are when they get here. Graves stood up. He crushed his cigarette. He walked to the workbench where the mini bike frame sat in its disassembled state, and he put both hands on the edge of the bench and leaned his weight into it, his head down, his gray beard touching his chest. When he spoke, his voice came from somewhere deeper than his throat. I was 23 when I found this club. I'd been sleeping in my truck for 2 years. I hadn't talked to my family in 5. I came in here because the door was open and I was cold, and I'd run out of places that would let me sit without buying something. He turned around. Ryder's old man, the guy who had the gavel before Ryder, he gave me a wrench and pointed at a bike and said, "Fix it." Didn't ask my name. Didn't ask where I came from. Just gave me something to do with my hands while the rest of me figured out whether I wanted to keep existing. He looked at Cole, at Ryder. That was 28 years ago. And every day since then I've been trying to be the man who hands someone else the wrench. So if you're asking me whether I'm willing to stand between 12 men and a kid who walked into our garage looking for noise, he picked up the mini bike's carburetor from the bench. I'm already standing. The garage went quiet. Not the oppressive silence of a house where violence waited. A different kind. The silence of men measuring themselves against a threat and deciding individually and collectively that the measurement came out in favor of staying. Ryder folded the map. Here's what we do. Ortiz gets the file. We build the legal case. We keep Lena and Theo covered. School, home, in between. We don't provoke. We don't approach Travis or his crew. We make ourselves visible enough that they know this isn't a one-night situation and invisible enough that they can't call it harassment. And if they come anyway, Cole asked, then we're here. That's not a plan. It's a position. Plans come after you know where you're standing. Cole looked at Ryder for a long time. Then he reached across the workbench, picked up a socket wrench, and tossed it once in his hand. I told that kid I'd be there when school gets out. Then be there. I will. But Ryder, Cole's blue eyes locked onto Ryder's face with an intensity that bordered on violence. If those men come anywhere near that boy, I'm not sitting on a motorcycle being loud. I'm not making a statement. I'm not being a symbol. He set the wrench down. I need you to understand that. Ryder understood. Every man in that garage would have understood. Because the thing living inside Cole Maddox, the thing that had been awakened by a 12-year-old boy's face in a window, by a 9-block walk through cold streets, by a question about a broken nose and a truthful answer about a phone book, that thing was not the controlled, measured, therapeutic version of trauma that counselors helped you process in safe rooms with soft chairs. It was the other kind. The kind that sleeps for decades and wakes up hungry. And Ryder, who had spent 9 years watching that hunger in men locked inside concrete rooms, knew that the most dangerous thing in this garage was not Travis Whitford's construction crew. It was the broken boy still living inside the man standing in front of him. At 2:47 that afternoon, Cole was parked outside Theo's school when the bell rang. He was on his bike, engine off, smoking a cigarette he didn't want because his hands needed occupation. Theo came through the gate at 2:53. He saw Cole. He crossed the sidewalk. You came back. I said I would. Theo adjusted his backpack. He looked at Cole's face, searching, measuring, and whatever he found there must have registered as acceptable because he fell into step beside the motorcycle as Cole walked it toward the street. They were 4 blocks from the apartment when Theo said, "There was a truck." Cole's hands tightened on the handlebars. When? This morning, after you dropped me off. My mom saw it from the window. A black truck, parked across the street. 2 men inside. She said they sat there for 20 minutes. Cole stopped walking. The motorcycle's weight settled against his hip. Did she recognize them? No. Did they do anything? They watched the building. Then they drove away. Cole's jaw moved, a small grinding motion, like gears meshing without lubricant. What did the truck look like? Black, big, like a work truck. It had a toolbox in the back, one of those metal ones. A construction truck. 12 guys. Toolboxes. Cole pulled out his phone and called Ryder. It rang twice. We've got a problem, Cole said. They're already here. The line went quiet. Then Ryder's voice stripped to its frame. Where's the boy? With me. Where's Lena? Apartment. Get them both to the garage. Now. Cole hung up. He looked at Theo. The boy was watching him with the focused stillness of a child who has spent 3 years learning to read the molecular shifts in adult behavior that precede disaster. We need to get your mom, Cole said. Why? Because the loud noise we made last night got someone's attention, and the someone isn't your mom's boyfriend. Theo's face did not crumble. It did the opposite. It hardened, tightened, pulled inward like a fist closing around something it refused to let go. It's worse, Theo said. Not a question. Yeah, kid, it's worse. They moved. Cole on the bike, engine alive. Theo sitting behind him with his arms wrapped around Cole's midsection and his face pressed against the leather of Cole's cut. The boy weighed almost nothing. Cole could feel every rib through the jacket. They reached the apartment in 3 minutes. Cole left the bike running at the curb. They took the stairs 2 at a time. Theo leading, Cole behind, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the stairwell where Lena had stopped moving 3 weeks ago with garbage bags in her hands and something worse than sadness on her face. 3rd floor. Theo knocked, 3 quick raps. The door opened on a chain. Lena's eye appeared in the gap, green, bloodshot, rimmed with the dark circles of a woman who had not slept in 36 hours. Baby. Mom, we have to go. What? Cole stepped into view. Lena's eye widened. The chain stayed on. Ma'am, my name's Cole. I'm with the Highway Saints. We were here last night. I know who you were. Her voice was thin but not weak. Strained, the voice of a woman holding a door shut against something she could feel pressing from the other side. I know what you did. Then you know we're trying to help. Help! The word came out like a splinter being pulled from skin. You came here with your motorcycles and your noise, and now there's a truck outside my building with two men I've never seen, and my son is telling me to leave my own home. Ma'am, don't ma'am me. Lena's eye was wet, but her voice was iron. Dale has a brother. Did you know that? Did your president know that when he decided to play hero at 2 a.m? Travis Whitford. I've never met him, but Dale talked about him like he was something people don't come back from. And you brought him to my door. The chain stayed on. Lena's eyes stayed fixed on Cole's face. Theo stood between them, his body angled toward his mother, his hand flat against the door as though he could hold both worlds in place through touch. Cole didn't argue. He didn't defend. He stood in that hallway with 30 years of unprocessed damage in his chest and a 12-year-old boy's ribs imprinted on his forearms, and looked at a woman who had every right to slam the door in his face. You're right, he said. We didn't know, and we should have. And I'm sorry. Lena stared at him. But right now, there are men who know where you live and what apartment you're in and what your son looks like. And our garage is 6 blocks from here with 19 men in it who made a choice last night to stand between your family and the thing trying to hurt it. I can't undo what we started, but I can get you somewhere safer than behind that chain. The hallway was silent except for the sound of the building. Pipes, heating vents, the low hum of other people's lives continuing behind their own locked doors. Lena looked at Theo. The boy looked back at his mother with an expression that no 12-year-old should know how to make. The expression of someone asking for permission to hope, knowing that the last time he hoped it cost them both something they couldn't get back. Lena closed the door. The chain scraped. The door opened. She was dressed, shoes on. A bag already packed and sitting by the coat rack, the kind of bag a woman keeps ready when she's been living with a man who might make leaving necessary at any moment. She'd been ready to run. She just hadn't known where. Let's go, she said. They went down the stairs, Cole first, Lena in the middle, Theo behind, his hand on his mother's shoulder, not guiding but anchoring. The touch of a child who has learned that the people he loves can disappear if he doesn't physically hold them to the earth. They reached the street. Cole's Harley idled at the curb. The street was empty. No black truck, no watching men, no visible threat. But the absence of visible threat was itself a threat, because it meant Travis Whitford's people had seen what they needed to see and left, which meant the next move was theirs. Cole looked both ways. He pulled out his phone. Coop, I need a cage at Theo's building. Now. I've got the mother and the kid. Coop, whose day job involved a pickup truck the size of a small apartment, arrived in 4 minutes. Lena and Theo got in the cab. Cole rode alongside. They moved through the streets in a 2-vehicle convoy that drew exactly the kind of attention Cole didn't want but couldn't avoid. 6 blocks, 5 blocks, 4. At 3 blocks, Cole's phone buzzed. A text from Ryder. 4 words. Truck spotted near garage. Cole accelerated. The Harley's engine screamed between the buildings. Coop matched speed. They covered the last 3 blocks in 90 seconds. Black Hollow Garage appeared ahead. Its corrugated roof, its brick walls, its floodlights now blazing in the gray afternoon. The bay door was open. Men stood inside, visible through the opening, their bodies arranged in the specific configuration of people who have received new information and are recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Cole pulled in first. Coop followed. The bay door came down behind them with a sound like a steel curtain falling on the last act of a play that no one in the room had auditioned for. Lena stood in the middle of Black Hollow Garage, holding her son's hand, surrounded by 19 men in leather cuts, and looked around with the expression of a woman who had just traded one cage for another and wasn't sure yet whether the new one had locks on the inside or the outside. Ryder stepped forward. Mrs. Mercer. Don't, Lena said. Her voice cracked on the word but held. Don't be polite. Don't be gentle. Tell me exactly what's happening and what you've done and what's coming. Because I spent 3 years being managed by a man who controlled information, and I swore I would never let another man decide what I was ready to hear. Ryder looked at this woman, exhausted, terrified, furious, standing in a motorcycle garage with a packed bag and a 12-year-old and nothing else. And he saw something he recognized from a decade inside corrections. Not a victim. A survivor who'd been misclassified. Okay, Ryder said. Here's what's happening. And he told her everything. Dale's history, Travis, the construction crew, the truck, the calls, the deputy, the file being built, all of it, unfiltered, unmanaged, delivered with the clinical precision of a man who understood that this woman's survival depended on her having the same information he did. Lena listened. Her face didn't change. Her hand didn't loosen on Theo's. When Ryder finished, she was quiet for 12 seconds. Then she spoke. Dale told me once that if I ever left, his brother would find me. I thought it was just talk, the kind of thing men say to keep you small. She paused. It wasn't talk. No, Ryder said. It wasn't. Lena looked around the garage, at the men, at the bikes, at the workbench where a rusted mini bike frame sat half-assembled, at the kerosene heater ticking in the corner, at the oil-stained concrete floor and the buzzing lights and the smell of coffee and cigarettes and leather and the particular human warmth of a room full of people who had no obligation to be standing between her and the thing that was coming. Why? She asked. Not angry this time, genuinely asking. Why did you do this? You don't know me. You don't know my son. Why did you open that door last night when a boy walked in asking for noise? The garage was silent. 19 men and a woman and a boy, standing in a circle of fluorescent light, surrounded by machines built for speed and escape in the open road. Graves spoke. Because we're what's behind the last door, ma'am, and the last door doesn't get to close. Outside, the rain intensified. It hammered the corrugated roof with renewed force, drowning the sound of a black construction truck that had just parked, engine running, headlights off, in the alley behind Black Hollow Garage. Inside the cab, a phone glowed. A text message, outgoing, 2 words. Found them. The text arrived on Ryder's phone at 3:11 p.m. Not from Ortiz, not from any contact he recognized. A number with no name attached, and 2 words that didn't need a name. Found them. It was a screenshot, forwarded from Coop, who'd been checking the security camera mounted above the garage's rear bay door. A camera so old and neglected that most of the saints had forgotten it existed. The image was grainy, rain-smeared, barely legible. But there it was. A black truck, toolbox in the bed, parked in the alley behind the garage, 40 feet from the back wall. Headlights dark, engine running. 2 figures in the cab, silhouettes against the ambient glow of a distant streetlight. Ryder stared at the image for 4 seconds. Then he looked up. The garage was full. 19 saints. Lena sitting on a folding chair near the kerosene heater with a blanket around her shoulders that someone had pulled from a storage bin. Theo standing beside the workbench where Graves had laid out the mini bike parts, his hand resting on the carburetor as though touching something mechanical could anchor him to a world that was shifting beneath his feet. Ryder caught Cole's eye. Then Graves. A tilt of his head toward the office. The 3 of them moved. Nobody else noticed. Or if they noticed, they understood that the movement meant something was happening that required the specific kind of conversation that happened behind closed doors with lowered voices. Ryder shut the office door. He held up his phone. Cole and Graves looked at the image. That's them, Cole said. That's the truck Theo described, Ryder confirmed. Parked in our alley, right now. How long? Coop says the camera caught them pulling in 9 minutes ago. They haven't moved. Graves leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. Surveillance. Or a message, Ryder said. They want us to know they're here. Travis doesn't send 2 guys to sit in an alley for information. He sends them to apply pressure. Or test response time, Cole added. See how fast we react. See how many come out. Count heads. The 3 men stood in the small office, surrounded by the detritus of club business. Old invoices, parts catalogs, a calendar from 2 years ago still showing March. And processed the reality that the situation had escalated from theoretical threat to physical presence in less than 12 hours. Options, Ryder said. The second time in 24 hours he'd used that word, and it tasted worse each time. I go out the back door, Cole said, alone. I walk to the truck. I look in the window. I let them see my face. And then what? And then they know that we know. They already know that we know. They parked in our alley. Then I go out there and tell them to leave. No. Ryder's voice was flat. Nobody approaches that truck. We don't know what's in it. We don't know what instructions those guys have. And we don't give Travis a confrontation he can spin into justification. Justification for what? Graves asked. For whatever comes next. Right now, we're a motorcycle club that parked on a public street. We're legal. We're clean. The second one of us walks up to that truck and starts a conversation, we become aggressors. And Travis, who runs a legitimate construction business on paper, becomes the guy defending his brother from biker gang harassment. The word gang landed in the room like a slap. None of the saints used it. It was the word the world used for them. The lazy, categorizing word that turned complex men into simple threats. So we do nothing, Cole said. Not a question, an accusation. We do something. We call Ortiz. Ortiz is building a file, Ryder. Files take weeks, months. That truck is 40 feet away right now. And those two guys in that truck haven't committed a crime. They're parked in an alley. That's it. If Ortiz sends a unit, they'll check IDs, run plates, and leave. And Travis will know we're working with the law, which means he changes his approach, which means Ortiz loses the element she needs to build the case. Cole's jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides, the unconscious rhythm of a man whose body wanted to do something his mind was being told to suppress. There's a woman and a kid in our garage, Cole said quietly, and there are two men in our alley who work for a man who makes problems disappear. I need a better answer than call Ortiz. Ryder looked at Cole for a long moment. The fluorescent light in the office was dying. One of the tubes had been flickering for weeks and was now producing more shadow than illumination, so the two men's faces were half lit, divided between visible features and dark hollows. Here's your answer, Ryder said. We move Lena and Theo tonight, not to their apartment, not to a shelter. Shelters have intake processes, and intake processes create records, and records can be found. We move them to a place that doesn't exist on paper. Where? Walter Boone. The name landed differently than Ryder expected. Graves straightened up. Cole's hands stopped moving. Walter Boone was 67 years old, retired mechanic. He lived in a house at the end of a dead-end street in a neighborhood that had been slowly depopulating for a decade. He was not a member of the Highway Saints, had never been, and had no official connection to the club. What he had was a 3-bedroom house with a paid-off mortgage, a workshop in the garage, and a quiet, relentless guilt about the sounds he'd heard through his apartment walls for years. Sounds he'd identified correctly, responded to never, and carried like a stone in his chest until he showed up at Black Hollow 6 months ago and told Ryder he wanted to help with something, anything, whatever would let him sleep at night. Ryder had kept Walter in his back pocket, a resource that existed outside the club's visible infrastructure. A safe house that wasn't a safe house, because it had never been used as one, had no digital footprint, no connection to the Saints, and no reason for anyone looking for Lena Mercer to ever find it. Does Walter know? Graves asked. I called him an hour ago. He's ready. Does Lena know? Not yet. Cole exhaled. She's going to fight it. Probably. She just got out of one man's control. Now we're telling her to hide in another man's house. It's temporary. Until Ortiz... You keep saying Ortiz. 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 Cole's voice rose half a register. Not shouting, not yet, but the pressure was audible, the way you can hear water building behind a dam before the dam shows cracks. What happens when Ortiz doesn't come through? What happens when the warrant takes too long, the witnesses back out, the system does what the system always does? What then? Then we figure it out. That's not good enough. It's what I have. The two men stood facing each other in the dying light of the office. Outside the door, they could hear the low murmur of the garage. Men talking in careful voices, the clink of tools, the kerosene heater ticking its metronome rhythm. And beneath it all, so faint it was almost imagined, the low idle of an engine in the alley that did not belong to any of them. Graves broke the silence. "I'll talk to Lena." Both men looked at him. "She doesn't trust either of you right now. Ryder, you're the president who made the call that brought this down on her. Cole, you're the man walking her son through the streets. She's grateful, but gratitude doesn't equal trust. Not for a woman who's been conditioned to distrust every man who tells her he's helping." He pushed off the wall. "But I'm the old man with a mini bike and a wrench. I'm the least threatening thing in this building. And I've got a face that looks like somebody's grandfather, which is exactly the face she needs to see when someone tells her she's got to run again." It wasn't a plan. It was a patchwork of instincts and desperation stitched together by men who were better at fixing engines than fixing situations. But it was what they had. Ryder nodded. They left the office. Graves walked to where Lena sat. He pulled up a milk crate and lowered himself onto it with the careful deliberation of a man whose knees hadn't been reliable since the 90s. He didn't touch her, didn't lean in. He sat at a distance that communicated presence without encroachment, and spoke in a voice so low that Theo, standing 6 feet away, couldn't hear what was being said. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. At the end of it, Lena's face was wet. Not from crying, her eyes were dry, her jaw set, but from the specific physical response of a body that has been holding tension for so long that the release of even a fraction of it produces moisture, like condensation on a cold glass. She nodded once. Graves stood up. He caught Ryder's eye. A single nod. The plan went into motion. At 4:30 p.m., 3 things happened simultaneously. Coop pulled his pickup truck into the garage through the front bay door. Lena and Theo got in the cab with a duffel bag and a blanket and a box of granola bars that someone had found in the shop's supply closet. The windows of the cab were tinted dark enough that the occupants were invisible from outside. At the same time, Dutch and Nails walked out the garage's back door into the alley. They didn't approach the black truck. They walked to their own motorcycles, parked along the alley's north wall, and started their engines. The sound was deliberate, attention-grabbing, filling the narrow alley with the specific frequency of Harley-Davidson combustion that made conversation and surveillance equally impossible. The black truck's occupants, 2 men in work jackets, faces obscured by the rain and the reflected glare of Dutch's headlight, watched the bikers. Dutch and Nails sat on their idling bikes and watched the truck. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And while this mechanical staring contest occupied the alley, Coop's pickup rolled out the front of the garage, turned right, and disappeared into city traffic carrying a woman and a boy who had been invisible for the entire maneuver. Ryder watched the pickup leave from inside the bay door. He pulled out his phone and called Coop. Clean. Nobody followed. I'm taking surface streets, no highway. Walter's expecting you. Copy. Ryder hung up. He looked at the rear camera feed on his phone. The black truck was still in the alley. Dutch and Nails were still on their bikes. The standoff continued, purposeless now, since the thing the truck had come to watch had already left through the front door. 7 minutes later, the black truck backed out of the alley and drove away. Dutch called Ryder. Gone. Headed north. Follow? Already on it. Nails has the plate. The plate came back 40 minutes later, registered to a construction company. Travis Whitford, principal owner. The address matched the property on the map Ortiz had provided. Ryder called Ortiz. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. When it was over, Ryder came out of the office and stood in the center of the garage with the specific posture of a man who has just been given information that divides everything into before and after. Ortiz got the warrant, he said. The room went still. Not for Travis, for Dale. Aggravated assault, violation of protective orders across state lines, witness intimidation, and a new charge, stalking in connection with the truck at Lena's building. A judge signed it 40 minutes ago. State police are coordinating with county. When? Cole asked. Tonight. They're executing tonight. Dale's phone pinged at Travis's property 2 hours ago. If he's still there, they pick him up. And if Travis interferes? Ortiz says they're going in heavy, full tactical. Travis's construction crew is muscle for hire, not a militia. She thinks they'll scatter when badges show up. She thinks. It's the best assessment she's got. Cole looked at Ryder. Something was wrong, not with the plan. The plan was the first thing in 48 hours that resembled institutional competence. Something was wrong with Ryder's face. The extra weight behind his eyes had shifted, reconfigured, become something that Cole couldn't read. "What aren't you telling me?" Cole said. Ryder hesitated. It was brief, half a second, maybe less, but Cole caught it the way a mechanic catches an engine skip. Ortiz said something else, about the file on Dale. "What about it?" "The victim willing to testify. The one from the other county. The woman who'd agreed to give a statement about Dale's pattern of abuse." "Yeah?" "She called Ortiz this morning, recanted, said she was mistaken, said she didn't want to be involved." The implications moved through the room like cold air. "Someone got to her," Cole said. "Ortiz thinks Travis. Or someone working for Travis. The timing is too clean. 36 hours after we rolled on Dale's Street, the only cooperating witness suddenly changes her mind. So the case is weaker. The case still has Lena, still has the protective orders, still has the pattern. But the cooperating witness was the anchor. Without her, the prosecutor might plead it down. Again." Graves, who had been listening from the workbench where the mini bike sat in its evolving state of assembly, set down a wrench. The metal-on-wood sound was louder than it should have been, as though the garage itself was amplifying small noises to compensate for the enormity of what was being discussed. "So we need Lena to testify," Graves said. "We need Lena to be willing to testify," Ryder corrected. "And Lena is a woman who just watched the last cooperating witness get scared into silence, which means she's going to be asked to do the thing that someone else just proved is dangerous." "She'll do it," Cole said. Everyone looked at him. "She packed a bag before we got there. She had shoes on. She was ready to run before we knocked. That's not a woman waiting to be rescued. That's a woman who's been planning her move and didn't have anywhere to go. Give her somewhere to go, and she'll burn the whole thing down herself." Ryder looked at Cole for a long time. "You've known her for 6 hours." "I've known her for 30 years, Cole said. "She's my mother. She's Graves's mother. She's every mother in every apartment behind every thin wall that every man in this room pressed his ear against when he was too small to do anything except listen and count." The garage was silent. The heater ticked. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere outside, a car alarm wailed for 20 seconds and then stopped, as if the city itself had tried to scream and given up. At 9:47 p.m., Ryder's phone rang. "Ortiz. We're moving in 20 minutes. State Police Tactical Unit, 8 officers, entry through the main gate. I need your people off the road tonight, all of them. Nobody within 5 miles of that property." "Understood." "Kane." "Yeah?" "If this goes sideways, I never talk to you. The file came through anonymous channels. You and your club don't exist in the paperwork." "We never do." He hung up. The garage buzzed with a specific kind of energy. Not excitement, not anxiety, but the loaded stillness of men who have done everything they can and must now watch the result from a distance. Bikes were parked. Tools were down. Coffee was poured and forgotten. Cigarettes burned to the filter in ashtrays that nobody emptied. Cole sat alone on his bike near the bay door, his phone in his hand, staring at the screen as though will alone could make it ring with news. Graves worked on the mini-bike. His hands moved automatically, threading bolts, adjusting clearances, testing connections, while his mind occupied a different space entirely. The carburetor he'd cleaned that morning was back in place. The fuel line was attached. The throttle cable was connected. Piece by piece, the machine was becoming something that could run. At 10:09 p.m., Ryder's phone buzzed, a text from Ortiz. One line. "Unit is moving. 10 minutes. 15. The garage held its breath. Ryder stood in the center of the floor, his arms at his sides, his eyes on the phone in his hand. Every man watched him, the way men watch a signal fire. Not the fire itself, but the face of the person reading what the fire means. At 10:31 p.m., the phone rang. Ryder answered, listened. His face didn't change for 9 seconds. Then it did. The change was small. A loosening in the muscles around his eyes, a shift in his jaw, a release of tension in his shoulders that dropped them a 1/4 inch. To anyone who didn't know him, it would have been invisible. To the men in that garage who had spent years reading the seismography of Ryder Kane's expression, it was as loud as an engine firing. He lowered the phone. They got him. The sound that moved through the garage was not a cheer. It was deeper than that, A collective exhalation, a release of compressed air from 19 sets of lungs that had been holding it without knowing. Some men closed their eyes, some looked at the ceiling. Coop sat down on a milk crate and put his head in his hands. Dutch lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Dale was at Travis's property, Ryder continued. He didn't run. Couldn't run. The tactical unit came through the front gate with full lights and sirens. Travis's crew, 6 of them on site, scattered. 2 were picked up at the property line. The rest ran into the woods. And Travis? Cole asked. Travis wasn't there. The exhale caught in every throat. The brief moment of release, the fraction of a second where the world felt lighter, snapped back like a rubber band. What do you mean he wasn't there? Ortiz says he wasn't on the property when they entered. His truck was. His phone was. But Travis Whitford was not in the house. Not in the construction yard. Not on the 40 acres. Where is he? Ryder looked at Cole. They don't know. The kerosene heater ticked. Rain fell. The fluorescent lights buzzed their endless, indifferent hymn. Cole stood up from his bike. His body had shifted. Subtly, but entirely. The way he held his shoulders, the angle of his head, the set of his hands. Everything about his posture had reorganized around a single axis. And the axis was not relief or exhaustion or any of the things a man should feel when the immediate threat has been arrested and the law has done its job. The axis was fear, not fear for himself. Cole Maddox had stopped fearing for himself at 14, in a house where fear was the atmosphere and the only way to survive was to stop breathing it. The fear that ran through him now was directional, pointed, targeted, aimed at a specific point in space. A dead-end street. A house with a paid-off mortgage. A retired mechanic named Walter Boone. And behind Walter's front door, sleeping for the first time in 36 hours, a woman and a boy who had no idea that the brother of the man who hurt them was unaccounted for and moving through the night like a blade with no handle. Ryder, Cole said. His voice was the voice from the stairwell. Stripped, mechanized, the human components removed to make room for function. Does Ortiz know about Walter's place? No, nobody knows. That's the point. Then nobody knows where Lena and Theo are. Correct. And nobody knows where Travis is. Correct. Cole pulled on his gloves, zipped his cut, walked to his bike. Where are you going? Ryder asked. Walter's. Cole. I told that boy I'd be there. I told him he wouldn't walk alone. It's almost 11. You can't. I'm not asking. Cole swung a leg over the dyno. The bike settled under him. He reached for the key. Travis is in the wind. His brother just got picked up by a tactical unit that lit up his property like a stadium. He's scared, he's angry, and he's the kind of man who makes problems disappear. Right now, his biggest problem is the woman who can testify against his brother. And the only thing standing between Travis and that woman is a 67-year-old mechanic with a guilt complex. He turned the key. The engine came alive. I'm going to Walter's. He looked at Ryder. The look lasted 2 seconds, the same duration as the look Ryder had given Dale on the apartment steps, loaded with the same density of compressed intent. Don't follow me, Cole said. If Travis is watching the garage, a convoy draws attention. 1 bike is a man going home. 19 bikes is a signal. Ryder opened his mouth, closed it. He knew Cole was right. He also knew that sending one man into an uncontrolled situation where a violent professional might or might not be present was the kind of decision that ended careers, ended chapters, ended lives. But Cole was already moving. The dyno rolled through the bay door into the rain-soaked street, its single headlight cutting a white line through the darkness. The sound of its engine faded through the neighborhood, diminishing, thinning, until it was absorbed by the larger noise of a city that didn't know what was happening in its margins. Ryder stood in the open bay door and watched the taillight disappear. Behind him, Graves set down the wrench he'd been holding for the last 4 minutes without using. He walked to Ryder's side. He's going to get himself killed, Graves said. Maybe. Or he's going to save them. Maybe. You going to let him go alone? Ryder was quiet for a long time. Rain misted against his face. The street was empty. The taillight was gone. Give him 15 minutes, then send Coop and Dutch. Separate routes. No formation. No lights until they're on Walter Street. Graves nodded. He turned to relay the order. And Graves. The old man stopped. Call Ortiz. Tell her we may have a location on Travis Whitford. Tell her to have a unit standing by. We don't have a location. We will, Ryder said. Because if Travis is looking for Lena, and Cole is riding toward Lena, then wherever Cole ends up is where Travis is going to be. The bay door came down. Cole rode through the rain. The route to Walters was 7 miles through the kind of streets that cities build when they've run out of reasons to maintain the infrastructure. Buckled asphalt, dead streetlights, intersections where the traffic signals had been replaced by four-way stops that nobody observed. The rain was heavier now, falling in sheets that overwhelmed his visor and turned the road ahead into a streaming, distorted canvas of reflected light. He rode at 40, not fast enough to attract attention, not slow enough to suggest uncertainty. His hands on the grips were steady, his breathing was controlled. But beneath the leather and the rain and the mechanical focus of navigating wet roads in the dark, something was happening inside Cole Maddox that he did not have the vocabulary to describe. He was going to protect a child. That sentence, so simple, so obvious, was detonating in his chest like a charge that had been set 30 years ago and was only now reaching ignition. Every mile he rode was a mile closer to the thing he had spent his entire adult life building walls around. The possibility that he could become the person who shows up, the one who opens the door, the one who stands between the small body and the large hand, the one nobody had been for him. Walter's Street appeared ahead, a dead end lined with small houses, most of them dark. Walter's was the last one on the right, a single-story bungalow with a chain-link fence and a porch light that cast a yellow circle on the wet front steps. Cole killed the headlight 2 houses before and rolled the last 100 yards on momentum, the engine at idle, barely audible above the rain. He parked at the curb, cut the engine, sat, listened. Rain on the roof of the nearest house, a dog somewhere, barking at nothing, the drip of water from a gutter, the distant hiss of traffic on the main road, half a mile south. And something else, a sound so faint it might have been imagination, a metallic sound, the kind of sound a truck door makes when it's opened slowly, carefully, by someone who doesn't want the sound to carry. Cole turned his head. At the far end of the dead-end street, where the asphalt gave way to gravel and the gravel gave way to a drainage ditch choked with weeds, a vehicle sat in the darkness. No headlights, no running lights. Just a shape, large, angular, the profile of a pickup truck, occupying a space where no vehicle should be at 11 o'clock on a rainy night. Cole's hands tightened on the handlebars. His phone was in his pocket. He could call Ryder. He could call Ortiz. He could do the smart thing, the measured thing, the thing that a man with a plan and a support structure and a functioning sense of self-preservation would do. Instead, he got off the bike. He walked toward the truck. And from inside Walter Boone's house, through a gap in the living room curtains, a 12-year-old boy who should have been sleeping watched a man walk alone through the rain toward a darkness that hadn't finished revealing what it held. Cole walked 30 feet through the rain before the truck door opened. Not the driver's side, the passenger side, the side facing Walter's house, the side that had a clear line of sight to the porch light and the front door and the gap in the living room curtains where a 12-year-old boy was watching. The door swung wide and a man stepped out into the wet gravel with the unhurried deliberation of someone who had been waiting and was finished waiting and had decided that the next thing to happen would happen on his schedule. Travis Whitford was not what Cole expected. He was smaller than Dale, 5'10", maybe 170, with the wiry, compressed build of a man who worked with his hands and didn't waste energy on excess mass. His face was narrow, clean-shaven, unremarkable. The kind of face that didn't register in memory because it was designed not to. He wore a canvas work jacket, jeans, steel-toed boots, no weapon visible, no aggression in his posture. He stood beside the open truck door with his hands at his sides and looked at Cole the way a contractor looks at a problem on a job site, assessing, measuring, calculating the cost of removal. "You're one of them," Travis said. His voice was quiet, not soft, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from a man who has never needed volume because the things he said carried weight regardless of decibel level. Cole stopped walking, 10 feet between them. The rain fell between their bodies like a curtain made of static. "Yeah," Cole said. "The motorcycle club." "Yeah." Travis nodded slowly. He looked past Cole toward Walter's house. His eyes moved to the porch light, to the windows, to the driveway where no car was parked because Coop had pulled into the garage and closed the door behind him. "My brother got arrested tonight," Travis said. "State police, tactical unit, whole production. You know about that?" "Yeah." "You involved?" "We ride motorcycles. That's what we do." Travis smiled. It was a small, functional smile that didn't reach his eyes or change the temperature of his face. The smile of a man who recognized a deflection and chose not to challenge it because the truth underneath was already visible. "My brother's got problems," Travis said. "I know that. He's got a temper. He makes mistakes. But he's my brother. And whoever put the state police on his property, put them on my property, on my business, on my life." He took one step forward. Cole didn't move. "Now I'm standing here in the rain looking at a house I've never been to, on a street I've never been to. Because my brother's girlfriend disappeared today, and the only people who had reason to move her are the same people who parked 19 motorcycles outside her apartment at 2 in the morning. His voice hadn't risen, his hands hadn't moved, but the space between the two men had compressed by 3 feet, and in that compression, Cole could feel the specific density of Travis Whitford's intent. Not violent, not yet, but directional. Aimed. The intent of a man who solved problems by removing the obstacles between himself and the outcome he'd already decided on. "I don't want trouble," Travis said. "I want to know where she is. That's it. I want to talk to her, make sure my brother's side of things gets heard, make sure nobody's making decisions based on one version of events." Cole looked at Travis Whitford in the rain and saw something he recognized, not from his own childhood, not from Dale, not from the obvious brutality of men who use their fists. He saw the other kind, the kind that operated through language, through framing, through the careful construction of narratives that made control look like concern and intimidation look like conversation. Travis wasn't here to hurt anyone. He was here to manage the situation, to find Lena, talk to her, apply the specific pressure that would make testifying feel more dangerous than staying silent. He'd done it before. Ortiz's cooperating witness had recanted that morning. Travis had gotten to her not with threats, but with presence. With the quiet implication that cooperation had consequences and silence had rewards. "I don't know where she is," Cole said. "I think you do. I think you should get back in your truck." Travis studied Cole's face the way a man studies a lock, looking for the mechanism, the weakness, the point of entry. "You're the one who walked the kid to school." Cole's breath caught, a fraction of a second. Invisible to most people. Not invisible to Travis, who had spent his adult life reading the involuntary responses of people under pressure. "I had eyes on that building all day," Travis continued. "Saw you on the bike this morning. Saw the kid come out. Saw you walk together. 9 blocks, wasn't it? That's a long walk in the cold." He tilted his head. "You care about that kid." It wasn't a question. It was a key being inserted into a lock. "That's your weakness," Travis said quietly. "Not the woman, not the club, the kid. You care about him the way a man cares about something that reminds him of himself. I can see it. It's all over your face." Cole's hands were at his sides. They were not shaking. They were perfectly, terrifyingly still. The stillness of a man who has reached the edge of a decision and is standing on it with both feet. "Get in your truck," Cole said. His voice had changed again. Not the stripped voice, not the mechanical voice. Something older. Something that came from the room with the model airplane and the boot print and the 9 times a phone book hit a 14-year-old's face. The voice of a boy who had grown into a man who had grown into something that could not be categorized as safe or dangerous because it was both, simultaneously, and the only thing determining which version emerged was what happened in the next 10 seconds. Travis didn't move. "I'm going to find her," Travis said. "Tonight, tomorrow, next week. I always find them. That's what I do. And when I find her, I'm going to have a conversation, a civil, respectful conversation, about what's best for everyone involved, including your kid." "He's not my kid." "He might as well be." The rain fell. The street was dark. Walter's porch light hummed its yellow vigil. And somewhere inside the house, behind a curtain, a boy was watching. And the boy could not hear the words being spoken, but he could read the geometry of two bodies facing each other in the rain, and he understood, the way children who grow up in violence understand everything, that the distance between those bodies was the distance between safety and its opposite. Cole took one step forward. "I'm going to say this once," he said, "and you're going to listen. Because I'm not the president. I'm not the law. I'm not a man with a plan or a badge or a file or a warrant. I'm a man who got hit with a phone book until his nose broke and nobody came. Nobody opened the door. Nobody walked him to school. Nobody stood in the rain and said, 'I'm here.'" He took another step, 8 feet, 7. "So when I tell you to get in your truck and drive away from this street and never come back, not for the woman, not for the boy, not for any version of the story your brother once told, I need you to understand that the thing standing in front of you is not a biker or a club member or a man following orders." 6 feet. "It's every kid who ever pressed his ear against a wall and counted the seconds. And there are 19 more just like me. And we know your name. And we know your address. And we know your business. And every single victim your brother left in 4 counties knows our phone number now. So the math you're doing in your head, the calculation about whether you can manage this, contain this, make this go away the way you made the witness go away, that math is wrong. The variable's changed. You just don't know it yet." Travis looked at Cole. For the first time, something in his expression shifted. Not fear, not retreat, but recalculation. The quiet, mechanical process of a man updating his assessment of a situation that had stopped conforming to his model. Headlights appeared at the entrance to the dead-end street. 2 of them. Then 2 more. Coop's truck, rolling slow. Dutch's Harley behind it. Lights on. Engine rumbling through the rain like a warning spoken in a language older than words. Travis looked at the headlights. Looked at Cole. Looked at Walter's house. The math had changed. He stepped backward. 1 step. 2. His hand found the truck door. He got in. The door closed. The engine started. A diesel growl, deeper than the Harleys but lonelier, a single sound against many. The truck backed down the dead-end street, its reverse lights painting the wet gravel red. It reached the entrance, turned, and disappeared north. Cole stood in the rain. He stood there for a long time. The headlights of Coop's truck illuminated him from behind, casting his shadow long and thin across the wet street toward Walter's house. The rain ran down his face and into his collar and through the leather of his cut, and he didn't move because movement required a transition from one state to another, and Cole was between states, between the man who had walked toward a truck in the dark and whatever he was becoming now that the truck was gone. Coop parked. Dutch killed his engine. They walked to Cole. "He gone?" Dutch asked. "Yeah." "Coming back?" Cole looked down the empty street. The taillights had vanished. The rain had closed behind the truck like water behind a stone. "No," Cole said. And he meant it. Not because he could predict Travis Whitford's behavior, but because he understood something about the encounter that Travis himself might not have grasped yet. The bluff had worked because it wasn't a bluff. Every word Cole had spoken was true. The variables had changed. The math was different, and the cost of pursuing Lena Mercer, the cost measured not in violence or legal consequences, but in the specific, relentless, ungovernable attention of damaged men who had found a purpose, the cost had exceeded what Travis was willing to pay. Some fights aren't won with fists. Some fights are won when the other man looks at you and sees something he can't calculate. Cole walked to Walter's front door. He knocked 3 times. The door opened. Walter Boone stood in the doorway, a thin man with white hair and mechanic's hands, wearing a flannel robe and slippers, with the expression of a person who had spent the last hour listening to sounds outside his house and preparing for outcomes he couldn't control. "He's gone," Cole said. Walter exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that carried decades of accumulated guilt and the first faint suggestion that some portion of it might eventually be set down. "The boy's awake," Walter said. "He saw you through the window." Cole stepped inside. The house smelled like old wood and engine grease and the lavender fabric softener that Walter's late wife had used and that Walter continued buying because stopping would mean admitting she was gone. Theo stood in the hallway, pajamas that were Walter's, too big, rolled at the ankles and wrists, making him look even smaller than he was. His face was pale, his eyes were wide, but he was not trembling. He was standing with the particular stillness of a boy who had watched a man walk into darkness on his behalf and needed to see that man walk back out. Cole looked at Theo. Theo looked at Cole. Neither of them spoke. The hallway was narrow, lit by a single wall sconce that threw warm light across the old hardwood floor and the framed photographs on the walls. Walter's wife, Walter's shop, a younger Walter standing beside a motorcycle that no longer existed. Then Theo moved. Not a lunge, not a collapse, not the dramatic gesture of a child in a movie learning to trust. He walked forward, 3 steps, deliberate, measured, the same way he walked everywhere, counting, controlling. And he stopped in front of Cole and put his forehead against Cole's chest. That was all. Forehead against leather. The small, warm pressure of a boy's skull against a grown man's sternum. No arms, no embrace, just contact. The minimum viable connection between 2 people who had both learned that touching was dangerous and were testing, carefully, whether it could also be safe. Cole stood perfectly still. His arms hung at his sides. His hands, those scarred, tattooed, wrench-worn hands, hovered 2 inches from the boy's shoulders, shaking, unable to close the distance. Then they closed it. He put his hands on Theo's shoulders, gently, the way you touch something you're afraid of breaking. And Theo leaned in. 1 more inch, 1 more degree of weight transferred from his own body to Cole's, and the sound that came out of the boy was not a sob. It was smaller than that, quieter. The sound of air escaping from a space that had been sealed for 3 years. Lena appeared at the end of the hallway. She stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom, wearing a sweatshirt and jeans, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked at her son, at the man holding him, at the narrow hallway of a stranger's house where, for reasons that defied every pattern, she had learned about men and safety and the architecture of trust. Her boy had chosen to rest his head. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The next 6 weeks passed the way broken bones heal, slowly, painfully, with setbacks that felt like failures and progress that was invisible until suddenly it wasn't. Dale Whitford was arraigned on 11 charges across 3 jurisdictions. The cooperating witness who had recanted was contacted again, not by Ortiz, not by the prosecutor, but by Lena Mercer herself, who called the woman from Walter Boone's kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon and spoke to her for 47 minutes. What was said in that conversation stayed between the 2 of them, but the witness re-engaged. Her statement was reinstated. The prosecutor's case grew teeth. Travis Whitford was not arrested. There was insufficient evidence to connect him directly to witness intimidation, and his construction business remained operational. But the attention from Ortiz, from the county sheriff, from a network of cooperating victims who had been given a phone number and a promise, that attention settled on Travis like weather, persistent, inescapable. Not violent, but present. The kind of pressure that doesn't break a man but makes his business slowly, steadily, less profitable, less convenient, less worth the cost. Within 3 months, Travis closed the construction yard. He moved to another state, a new geography, a new set of problems that were someone else's to solve. The Highway Saints didn't track him. They didn't need to. The math had been changed permanently, and Travis Whitford was the kind of man who followed the math wherever it led. Lena and Theo stayed at Walter's for 4 weeks. During that time, the old man's house underwent a transformation that was less renovation than resurrection. Graves came by 3 times a week to work on the minibike with Theo in Walter's garage. The 2 of them bent over the engine like surgeons operating on a patient that neither of them could afford to lose. Walter taught Theo how to use a torque wrench, how to read a timing mark, how to listen to an engine and hear what it needed instead of what you wanted it to say. Lena found work through a contact of writers, a woman who ran a cleaning service and didn't ask questions about gaps in employment history. The work was physical, unglamorous, and exactly what Lena needed. A routine that belonged to her, hours that she controlled, a paycheck that no one else's name was on. She moved into a new apartment in February. Different neighborhood, different building. A 2-bedroom on the 4th floor with a lock that worked, and windows that faced east, so the morning light came in first thing and stayed until noon. The Saints helped her move, 5 of them, including Coop with his truck, and Nails with a tool belt, and Dutch with an inexplicable talent for assembling IKEA furniture. They carried boxes up 4 flights of stairs in the cold and left without being asked to stay for dinner, because they understood that the most important thing they could give this woman was the experience of men entering her space, being useful, and leaving when the job was done. No strings, no debts, no expectation of gratitude converting into obligation. Just help, and then distance, and then presence again when presence was needed. Cole walked Theo to school every morning for 2 months. Then 5 days a week became 3. Then 3 became 1. Not because Cole pulled away, but because Theo started walking parts of the route alone. First 1 block, then 2, then 4, reclaiming the streets that fear had taken from him, step by step, counting not seconds between impacts, but blocks between his front door and the school gate where he no longer paused to scan for danger before entering. On the last morning that Cole walked him the full route, Theo stopped at the gate and turned around. "You don't have to come anymore," he said. Cole looked at the boy. Taller now. Still thin, but the angular hunger in his face had softened into something that looked less like deprivation and more like adolescence. The ordinary, unremarkable sharpness of a kid growing into his bones. "I know," Cole said. "I mean it. I'm okay." "I know you are." Theo shifted his backpack. He looked at the school, then back at Cole. "You going to be around?" "Where else would I be?" Theo almost smiled. Not quite. The muscles around his mouth shifted in the direction of a smile without fully committing. The expression of a person who was still learning that some movements of the face didn't have to be earned or calculated or protected. "See you at the garage," Theo said. "See you at the garage." The boy walked through the gate. He didn't look back. Cole stood on the sidewalk for a minute, maybe 2, watching the door close behind the kid, and then he turned and walked the 9 blocks back to his motorcycle alone. The morning was cold. March. Frost on the windshield, steam rising from the sewer grates, the smell of coffee leaking from Moretti's diner as Cole passed. He stopped. He'd never gone in before. He wasn't a diner man, wasn't a sit-down-and-eat-breakfast man, had spent most of his adult life consuming food the way machines consume fuel, standing up in transit, without pleasure or ceremony. But he went in. He sat at the counter. A woman with gray roots and a coffee pot that looked like it had been in service since the previous century poured him a cup without asking. The coffee was terrible, thin, burnt, tasting of the specific neglect that comes from a machine nobody loved. Cole drank it. He sat there for 20 minutes. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't think about Travis or Dale or the apartment on the 3rd floor. He looked out the window at the street where he'd walked a boy to school for 2 months, and he drank bad coffee, and he let the morning exist around him without needing to control it or survive it or count the seconds until it ended. It was, he realized, the first time in 39 years he had sat somewhere without calculating an exit route. By early spring, the mini bike was done. Graves had stretched the project deliberately, adding complications and repairs that weren't strictly necessary because the process of building, of standing beside a boy and handing him tools and watching his hands learn the difference between tight enough and too tight, was more important than the product. But eventually, every bolt was threaded, every gasket seated, every cable adjusted to spec, and the machine was complete. They fired it up on a Saturday afternoon in the parking lot behind Black Hollow Garage. The lot was full. Not just Saints. Neighbors, too. Women from the apartment buildings who had heard about what the club had done and started appearing at the garage on weekends with casseroles and questions and the tentative, testing energy of people approaching something they'd been taught to avoid. Kids who'd been told to stay away from bikers sat on the curb eating popsicles and watching Theo roll the mini bike out of the bay door with the concentrated seriousness of a surgeon wheeling a patient into recovery. Graves stood beside the bike. He didn't help Theo mount it. He didn't offer instructions. He'd spent 3 months teaching the boy everything the bike needed, and now the boy needed to do it himself. Theo kicked the starter. Once. Twice. The engine coughed, caught, sputtered, died. He adjusted the choke, kicked again. The engine caught and held. A small, rough, imperfect sound that was nevertheless the sound of something working, something alive, something that a boy had built with his own hands from parts that other people had discarded. Theo rode the mini bike in a slow circle around the parking lot. His speed was maybe 10 miles an hour, barely faster than walking. His hands on the grips were tight, his posture rigid, his face locked in the focused expression of absolute concentration. The bike wobbled on a turn, steadied, wobbled again. 19 Harleys sat in the lot around him like a border, a perimeter, a circle of chrome and leather that enclosed the space and made it safe. Lena stood near the bay door with a coffee cup in her hands and tears on her face that she didn't bother to wipe. Walter stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his chin trembling with the effort of containing something that had waited 67 years to be released. Cole leaned against his Dyna and watched. Theo completed the circle. He pulled up to where Graves stood and killed the engine. The sudden silence was enormous. Not threatening, not heavy, just large. The silence of a space where noise had done its work and was no longer needed. "Run's rough," Graves said. "I know," Theo said. "Timing's off. 0.5 degrees, I can hear it." Graves looked at the boy, a long, measuring look. The same look he'd given Theo the first night in the garage when a scared 12-year-old slipped through a steel door and asked for a sound loud enough to scare a man. "You can hear it," Graves repeated. "Yeah." "Then fix it Monday." Graves walked away. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The compliment was embedded in the assignment. You can hear what's wrong, so you're capable of making it right. It was the language of mechanics and of men who had never learned to express approval directly, only through trust. Theo sat on the mini bike in the parking lot, his hands still on the grips, and looked around at the crowd. The bikers, the neighbors, the kids on the curb, his mother by the door, the old man beside her, the circle of machines and people that had assembled around a sound he'd asked for 3 months ago in the rain. Cole walked over. He stood beside the bike. He didn't crouch down. Theo was taller now, and the bike added height, and the distance between their eye lines had closed from a foot to a few inches. "You built something loud after all," Cole said. Theo looked at him. And this time the smile came. Not the almost smile, not the tentative shift of muscles calculating risk. A real smile, unguarded. The gap between his front teeth, his mother's gap, inherited and visible, showed for the first time since Cole had known him. "Yeah," Theo said quietly, "just not the kind I thought." As sunset painted the garage gold and crimson, someone produced a camera. An old digital thing, boxy and outdated, belonging to Walter, who still believed that photographs should be taken with a device dedicated solely to the task. They gathered in the parking lot, 19 saints in their cuts, standing in a loose formation that was neither military nor casual, but something in between, the natural arrangement of men who were accustomed to occupying space together. Lena and Theo in the center, the boy still sitting on the mini bike, his mother's hand on his shoulder, Walter beside them, his mechanic's hands finally still. The neighbors who had come and stayed and brought their children and their casseroles and their willingness to believe that a motorcycle club on a dead-end street could be something other than what the world told them it was. The camera clicked. Nobody said cheese. Nobody posed. The photograph captured what was actually there. Boots on concrete, cigarette smoke drifting into the cooling air, Harleys lined beside battered pickups, laughter and silence coexisting in the same frame. A woman who had survived. A boy who had rebuilt. An old man who had finally answered the sounds he'd spent years ignoring. And 19 men who had discovered, in the process of protecting a stranger's family, that the thing they'd been protecting all along was the possibility that damaged people could choose, every single day, to become something other than what damaged them. Ryder stood at the edge of the group. He wasn't in the photograph. He'd stepped aside at the last moment, the way he always stepped aside when the thing he'd built outgrew his need to be visible in it. He watched from beside the bay door with his arms crossed and his scar catching the last of the daylight and an expression on his face that none of his brothers had ever seen. It was rest. Not happiness. Rest was older than happiness, deeper, harder to earn. The specific rest of a man who had spent his life standing in rooms full of cages and was finally standing in a room where every door was open. Cole found him after the photograph. They stood side by side in the bay door, watching the lot empty slowly, as the light faded and people drifted toward their cars and their homes and the ordinary evenings that waited for them. Ortiz called, Ryder said. Dale took a plea, 12 years, no parole eligibility for 8. Cole absorbed this. 12 years. Theo would be 24 when Dale Whitford became eligible for release. 24, and by then, whatever the boy became, mechanic, writer, something else entirely, he would be a man who had been walked to school and taught to hear a timing discrepancy and shown that silence was not something you had to survive alone. 12 years, Cole said. 12 years. They stood in the doorway. The sky deepened from gold to amber to the purple gray of a city settling into night. The Harleys in the lot gleamed in the fading light like sleeping animals, chrome cooling, engines ticking their slow descent from operational temperature to rest. Cole looked at the lot, at the mini bike parked beside his Dyna, at the oil stains on the concrete that mapped years of work and repair and the daily practice of making broken things run. Graves was right, Cole said. About what? Broken things aren't useless. You just rebuild them slow. Ryder looked at Cole, at the scar on his nose, at the tattoos on his arms, the gears, the clock faces with no hands, the Roman numerals that Cole had never explained and Ryder had never asked about. What are the numbers? Ryder asked. It was the first time in 16 years he'd asked. Cole looked down at his forearm. The numerals were black, precise, inked in a font that suggested permanence. The date I left, Cole said. The house, my father, all of it. The day I decided I was going to live long enough to become someone different. He looked at Ryder. Today's a good day to be someone different. Ryder nodded. He unfolded his arms. He looked at the garage, his club, his loud and damaged and impossible family, and he reached for the bay door chain. Lock up when you're done, he said. He walked to his Road King. The engine started. The sound filled the lot one last time, deep, mechanical, alive. And then Ryder Kane rode out into the evening, down the street, past the bodega where Felix stood in his doorway with a coffee cup and a nod, past the laundromat and the vacant lots and the rail yard, toward whatever piece of the world was waiting for him next. Cole stayed. He stood in the bay door for a long time after the sound of Ryder's engine had been absorbed by the city. The lot was empty now. The porch lights of nearby houses were coming on one by one, like small answers to a question nobody had spoken aloud. He pulled the bay door down. The chain rattled. The steel met concrete with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Inside the garage, the kerosene heater ticked. The fluorescent lights hummed. The minibike sat on its stand, engine cool, waiting for Monday, when a boy would come through the door and fix a timing discrepancy he could hear because someone had taught him to listen. And somewhere in the city, in apartments with thin walls, in houses where the silence was too heavy, in rooms where children pressed their ears against plaster and counted the seconds between sounds they shouldn't have had to learn, the story of what happened on a rainy night when 19 motorcycles shook a building until a violent man ran was being passed from one person to another, whispered in hallways and break rooms and waiting rooms, growing with each telling into something larger than the facts it contained. Not a legend. Legends are for people who don't exist. A phone number. Written on napkins, on the backs of receipts, on the inside cover of a library book in the children's section where a librarian who'd heard the story placed it without being asked. A phone number and a promise. The last door doesn't close.